I've been a patrol officer for a while now, and this happened about 6 years ago when I was still working evening shift in a smaller city outside of Buffalo. Not a huge department by any means, but busy enough that weird calls happen pretty regularly. Most of the time there's normal explanations for it too. But this one though, it still sticks with me. It was sometime around late July, maybe 2019 I would say. My partner and I were about an hour into the shift when dispatch sent us to check a possible break-in at a residential house. The caller, she was a woman who had just gotten home from work, and she said that she could hear people talking inside of the house. She was apparently waiting outside in her car because she thought that someone might still be in there. When we pulled up, she was pretty shaken up, but not hysterical. She told us that she'd left around 6 p.m., locked the doors behind her, and nobody else had a key except for her sister, who was out of state apparently. When she came back around 8:45, she walked up the driveway and heard what she described as two people talking quietly somewhere inside. No TV noise, no music, just voices. She said that she didn't open the door. Instead, she backed off the porch and called 911 from her car. We checked around the outside first like we normally do, walked the perimeter of the house, checking the windows, looking for pry marks or broken locks. Everything looked normal though, no forced entry anywhere. So we had her unlock the front door while we stood off to the side, and then my partner and I went in to clear the space. Standard procedure, slow walk through each room. The house itself wasn't very big. Living room, kitchen, small hallway, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom and a finished basement. The first floor was empty. Nothing disturbed, no open windows, and nothing out of place. We checked the basement next. Same thing, completely empty. While we were down there though, my partner suddenly stopped and pointed down the hallway toward the laundry area. I looked up for a second. It honestly looked like somebody moved across the far end of the hallway when I did too. Just a dark shape passing the doorway. Both of us saw it as well. We immediately moved down the hallway thinking that someone had ducked into the laundry room. When we got there, there's only 2 places that someone could hide: behind the furnace or in a small walk-in storage closet. Right as we got close, it looked like that same shadow shape moved into the closet, like a person stepping back into it. My partner yelled something like, "Police, come out now," and we both had our guns up. We stood there for probably 10 seconds staring at this closet door, but there was no one inside, no movement. So finally he pulled the door open, but the closet was completely empty. Not just empty as well, but the kind of empty where there's literally nowhere someone could hide. No attic hatch, no back door, nothing. We both checked the corners just in case someone was crouched down somehow behind it or whatever, but nothing was there. At that point, we kind of just looked at each other because neither of us had an explanation for what we had just seen. We finished clearing the house and confirmed that nobody was inside. All the windows were still locked from the inside too. We double-checked that. We brought the homeowner inside and explained that we didn't find anyone. While we were talking in the living room though, something else happened that made things even weirder. The window blinds next to the couch suddenly started moving back and forth like somebody was pushing them. Not violently, but just sort of swaying. But there was no fan on and no AC running, and the window itself was shut. The woman noticed it too and asked if we saw that. Neither of us really had anything useful to say, so we just told her that sometimes air vents can cause movement, and we tried to move on. We wrapped up the report and eventually we left. When I got back into the cruiser, I did what cops usually do when something about a call feels really off. I ran the address through our system to see if there were any past incidents there, and it turns out there was a major one. About 4 years earlier, the house had been the scene of a murder-suicide. A husband shot his wife during an argument, called 911 afterward, and then shot himself while still on the line with dispatch. Now, I'm not saying that what we saw had anything to do with that. It could have been lighting from the basement window, I'll admit. I mean, eyes play tricks on you sometimes, or maybe it was something else entirely. I don't know. but both of us definitely saw something move down that hallway and disappear into a closet that had no one inside of it. I've handled a lot of break-in calls since then, but that's the only time that I've ever drawn my gun on something that turned out to be, well, absolutely nothing. For context, my relationship with my mom has always been complicated because of the guy that she's been with for years. His name is Darren. She started dating him when I was about 8. I'm 18 now. He's always been a really controlling personality, and I never liked being around him. He's the kind of person who likes to test people or teach lessons, if that makes sense. But because of that, I moved in with my aunt when I was 15. I still see my mum from time to time, but I avoid Darren as much as I can. Anyway, back in early 2023, when I was still 16, my school sent a group of us to a youth leadership event in Oregon. It was about 3 days long, and they had us staying in a big downtown hotel. Nothing fancy by any means, just one of those big conference hotels where a bunch of schools were staying at once. The first night, something weird happened too. I was in the hallway near the elevators trying to find the vending machines. Some guy around my age walks up to me and asks if I can help him find his room, and at first I thought that he was just lost, but a couple of things about him were a bit off. He didn't have a backpack, luggage, or even a keycard in his hand. Also, he wouldn't look at me when he talked, and he kept looking down the hallway instead. He asked if I could walk him to the other side of the building because he said that he couldn't figure out the layout. I told him that I didn't know where that was either. I had literally just checked in like an hour ago. When I said that though, he kind of got irritated, like he was expecting me to go with him anyway. I just said sorry and I went back down toward the elevators. Maybe 10 minutes later, I ended up on a different floor because I took the wrong elevator, and when I stepped out, I saw the same guy again. This time he was standing with 3 older guys near a stairwell. Not teenagers either. They looked like they were in their mid-20s or something like that. All 4 of them stopped talking though and looked at me when I walked past. That made me uncomfortable, but I figured that maybe they were just staying at the hotel too. Over the next 2 days though, I kept seeing at least one of these guys around the building. Once near the lobby, once near the conference rooms, another time in the hallway near our floor. None of them actually spoke to me again, but every time that I noticed them, they seemed to be watching me. I tried telling myself that I was probably just noticing random people because I was already a little bit uneasy after that first interaction. But then the weirdest part happened that night before the trip ended. There was a big closing ceremony in one of the hotel ballrooms where they were announcing awards and stuff. There were hundreds of seats in that room. I was sitting in my school group when 2 guys came in late and sat directly beside me, which was odd because there were tons of empty seats everywhere else. These 2 were definitely older than high school age. Both were wearing hoodies with the hoods up, and one had a face covering like people wore during COVID. They didn't talk to me, they just sort of sat there really still and kept glancing in my direction. After maybe 5 minutes, my school advisor noticed them. She asked them which school that they were with, and they didn't answer clearly. They gave some vague response about being with another group. She ended up asking hotel security to check on them, and they were escorted out of the room. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was keeping track of where I was in that hotel. Nothing else happened though, and the trip ended the next morning and we went home. For a long time too, I just assumed it was a bunch of coincidences. But then, something came up recently that brought it all back. A few weeks ago, my mum and I were talking, and Darren somehow brought up that trip. He made this weird comment about how I shouldn't wander around hotels by myself. I asked what he meant, and my mum told me something that honestly made my stomach drop. According to her, Darren claimed that he had people keeping an eye on me during that trip because he thought that I needed to learn to be more careful. She said that he told her that he arranged for some guys that he knew to follow me around the hotel, just to scare me a little bit. She even said that he bragged that they were going to confront me at one point, but decided not to. I have no idea if it's actually true or not, or if he's just making stuff up to sound intimidating or whatever. Darren lies a lot and exaggerates things constantly, but the part that really bothers me is how closely that lines up with what actually happened. The guy asking me to walk somewhere, seeing the same group repeatedly, these two guys sitting right next to me in a huge room with empty chairs everywhere. Maybe it was all just a coincidence, and maybe my mother misunderstood what he meant. Maybe he was just talking big like he usually does. But if he actually did send people to follow a 16-year-old around a hotel just to mess with her, that's pretty disturbing, right? I still don't know what to believe. All I know is that that trip felt off the entire time, and hearing that explanation years later, well, it didn't make it feel any less creepy. So, I know that this might sound a bit weird, but I'm honestly just trying to figure out if anybody else has dealt with something like this before, because the stuff going on in my house, the last year or so at least, has started to freak me out a bit. For context, I live in a normal suburban house in Columbus. Nothing special about it. My parents bought it around 2018, and I've been living here since then. The first few weeks were completely normal as well. No weird stories about the place, nothing creepy that I noticed, and it was nice. Most of the odd stuff only ever started maybe, I would say, about a year ago. At first, it was just small things that I honestly just ignored, like catching movement out of the corner of my eye when nothing was there, or hearing noises somewhere in the house when I was alone. Stuff like that happens to everyone, so I didn't really think too much about it. But then one night, something happened that made me start paying more attention. You see, I had a friend over, his name was Kyle. We were just hanging out in the kitchen around midnight, watching some videos on his laptop and talking and whatnot. And at one point, I told him that I was going to the bathroom, which was down the hall from my bedroom. While I'm in there, I suddenly hear someone clearly say my name from down the hallway. Not loud yelling, but more like someone trying to get your attention. Then I hear it again, my name followed by "come here." The voice sounded a lot like Kyle, but something about it was just slightly off. Hard to explain, but it didn't sound exactly like him. So I yelled back "what" through the bathroom door, and there was no answer. And about 5 seconds later, I hear the same voice again from the direction of my bedroom saying my name again. At that point, I open the bathroom door and walk out into the hallway, expecting to see Kyle messing with me, but he wasn't there. I walk back to the kitchen, and he's sitting exactly where I left him, scrolling on his phone. I asked him why he was calling me, and he looked confused and said that he never left the kitchen, apparently. I thought that he was joking with me at first, but he swore that he hadn't moved, and honestly, he's not really the type to commit a prank like that. Usually he breaks character in like 2 seconds, in fact, if he's messing around. We even walked down the hallway together and checked my room, thinking that maybe someone else was in the house somehow, but I confirmed that nobody was there. That was the first time and the first thing that actually made me feel uneasy in that place. After that, more little things started happening too. Stuff like objects falling when nothing touched them. One time I was sitting on my bed and a small book slid off a shelf and hit me on the shoulder. Not a big deal or anything, but it just made no sense because it had been sitting there for weeks without moving. Another thing is the basement. So, our basement isn't finished except for a small laundry area and a storage space there as well. And whenever I go down there, I feel like someone else is down there with me. I know that sounds dumb and all, but that's just the best way that I can describe it. The laundry room is at the far end of the basement, and it's always darker than the rest of the area because the bulb in there is really weak. Every single time that I'm down there as well, I hear something coming from that room. Sometimes it sounds like someone shifting their weight or maybe stepping on the floor slowly or something. I've gone in there a bunch of times thinking that maybe a pipe is making noise or something like that, but nothing I can find ever really explains it. My cousin came over once as well, and even he said the basement felt weird, especially the laundry room area, is what he said. He didn't say that it was haunted or anything like that, just that it felt really uncomfortable being down there. Another thing that happened was during a power outage last winter. So, a storm knocked the power out for a few hours and the whole house was pitch black. I went into my bedroom to grab a hoodie, and since my phone was downstairs, I couldn't really see anything at all. While I'm walking toward my bed, I suddenly felt something brush across my shoulder, like someone passing right next to me. I literally froze immediately. My room is not crowded, like, at all. I mean, there's nothing hanging from the ceiling or anything that could have touched me like that. I turned around and just sort of stood there for a few seconds, listening, but the room was completely quiet. And so I ended up going back downstairs after that and waited for the power to come back on. To be clear, none of this stuff has actually hurt me or anything. It's just weird and it keeps happening. The voice thing is still the one that bothers me the most, because Kyle was literally in another room when it happened and I heard someone speaking clearly. I've tried to look for normal explanations, but I just cannot find any. The combination of stuff happening over time as well has made me feel very uneasy living here, especially when I'm home alone, because I just keep wondering if this is only going to get worse. So, if anyone here has dealt with anything similar to this, I would be curious to hear what it ended up being, because right now I'm mostly just hoping it's some kind of normal house issue that I just haven't figured out yet. So this is something that's been bugging me lately, and I figured that I'd throw it out here because I honestly don't know what to make of it anymore. So I'm 31 now, and I've had ADHD since I was a kid, diagnosed when I was around 8. Anyone who has it probably knows the usual stuff. Brain never really slows down, constantly distracted, always noticing random movement in the room and stuff like that. There's one thing though that I've always brushed off as just my brain being weird. You see, since I was young, I've had this thing where I'll see someone move in my peripheral vision, like a person walking past a doorway or maybe standing in a room. But when I actually look straight at it, there's never anything there. It's never been a full clear person or anything, more like the outline of someone, a dark shape, human height, usually standing still or moving slightly. When I was a teenager, I brought it up to a therapist once because it was happening a lot. He basically said that people with ADHD sometimes misinterpret motion or shadows when their brain is juggling too much input. Apparently, your mind sort of fills in the gaps and turns it into something familiar, like a person. He told me that it wasn't uncommon and that I'd probably grow out of it. But, well, I just never did. It kept happening through my 20s, but the difference is that I just sort of got used to it. It would pop up in my peripheral vision, I'd look, but there was never anything there and I would just sort of move on. After a while, too, I stopped reacting to it entirely. Well, fast forward to when I was about 27. That's when I met my wife and we moved into a small house about 2 years later. At some point early in our relationship, though, she noticed that I'd randomly look into empty rooms or hallways and ask if she had just walked by or whatever, and after it happened a few times, she asked what that was about. That's the only reason that I ever told her about the whole seeing movement in the corner of my eye thing. I didn't go into any detail, just sometimes my brain thinks that it sees someone when there's nobody there, and she laughed it off and basically just moved on. But then, something happened about 3 years ago that was the first time that it ever got weird. So one night I came home from work and went into the kitchen to grab something to eat, and I heard my wife walking around in the living room, so I assumed that she was about to come into the kitchen. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the usual shape move past the hallway entrance. I didn't even react. I mean, at that point it was basically just background noise to me. But then, my wife stepped into the kitchen from the other direction, and right away she looked confused and asked, "Did you see someone walk by?" That got my attention too, because I had never described what I see to her in detail, and I hadn't even said anything yet. I asked what she meant, and She just sort of shook her head and said never mind. She didn't want to talk about it. It was weird, but we both kind of dropped it, I guess, and nothing else ever really happened for a long time after that, too. But then, about 2 months ago, something else happened that kind of reset my brain about the whole thing. It was around 1 in the morning, and I had fallen asleep early because I got up for work at around 5. My wife was still awake in bed scrolling on her phone with the lamp on low, and I woke up to use the bathroom. The bathroom door is right across the foot of our bed, so the light from the lamp barely lights the hallway there. And as I got out of bed, I saw the usual shape near the bedroom door. Same thing that I've been seeing for decades now. Human-sized, standing there right near that wall. At this point, I literally don't react to it anymore, and I just sort of walked around it like it was a chair or something and went to the bathroom. When I came back, though, I climbed back into bed and closed my eyes, and about 5 seconds later, the bedroom light flipped on and my wife grabbed my shoulder and shook me. I thought something serious had happened because she looked pale. She asked me, "Did you not see that?" Still half asleep, I asked what she was talking about. She said that when I got up and opened the bedroom door that there was someone standing right next to it. She said that it looked like a person but darker, like it was the outline of something. And then she said the part that really got to me. She said that I walked around it like I knew it was there. I hadn't told her that's exactly what I usually do, and again, I hadn't even mentioned anything. She kept asking me why I didn't react to it, and I really didn't know what to say. I ended up explaining that I've been seeing the same thing in the corner of my vision since I was a kid, and so I just sort of ignore it now. What bothered her too wasn't just that she saw it. She said that when she first looked up from her phone, it looked like the thing was standing there watching me get out of bed, like it was waiting for me. I don't really have an explanation for any of that. My guess is still that it's something neurological, and maybe she caught some weird shadow at the exact wrong moment. It was just a coincidence. I'll be honest though, seeing it my whole life never really bothered me, and the part that actually got under my skin was realizing that somebody else has actually seen the same thing, in the exact same spot, at the exact same time apparently. Now my wife hates being in this house alone at night and keeps bringing up the idea of moving. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here wondering if whatever my brain has been seeing for the last 25 years or so isn't just in my head after all. So, I've had 2 experiences in my life that I cannot rationally explain, and they still stick with me all these years later. I've moved around a lot, lived in probably a dozen houses by now, and out of all of them, only 2 places ever gave me that genuine something is here feeling. You can chalk a lot of weird stuff up to coincidence or imagination, but these 2, not so much. The first one happened when I was 11. My sister and I were alone in our old house, a small brick place my parents had bought on the edge of town. My room always felt off, and not just a little creaky floor weird, but like something was watching you in the dark off. I'd often feel this sudden chill in the back of my neck at night, like cold air brushing by me, even though the windows were closed. One night, we went into the kitchen to grab a snack. Our bedroom door was always kind of heavy and had a sort of simple twist lock that you could only lock from the inside. We left it open because we were leaving the room, and when we came back a few minutes later, the door was closed and locked. I have absolutely no idea how that happened too. I mean, the windows were shut, the house wasn't drafty, and there was no way for my sister or me to have locked it without noticing. My mother tried to rationalize it as wind, but the lock wouldn't have engaged on its own like that. She even removed the lock afterward, which, looking back, I think that she did that because she knew something about that room just wasn't right. We moved shortly after to my stepdad's house, an hour further from our old school, which was a huge inconvenience at the time, but that house never felt the same. The second time, though, was when I was 24, living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. This one was way more unsettling too because, well, it involved some electronics. So around 3 in the morning one night, I woke up to my bedside lamp turning on by itself. I thought that maybe a short circuit or a power surge had caused it, but then my small stereo started playing music at full volume, but the CD player wasn't even on. I scrambled to shut everything off, went back to bed, and it happened again. Same sequence. Lights flickering, stereo powering on. Third time I unplugged everything and even taped the plugs down in the end. The next night, my laptop shut off mid-boot and I figured that it was overheating, but it wasn't. Then the microwave in the kitchen, which was 3 rooms away, suddenly turned on by itself. No timer, nobody near it. I'd never experienced anything like this in my life, and I shouted at it, half in disbelief and half in anger, "Stop messing with my stuff." And it went silent after that. But I couldn't sleep in that apartment anymore, and so within a week I moved. Since then, I haven't had anything that intense happen again. I get small weird things occasionally, shadows moving at the edge of my vision, doors creaking when nobody's there, but nothing that made me feel unsafe like those 2 events. I don't know if it was ghosts, some kind of electronic interference, or whatever it was, but all I do know is that both times, no explanation made sense, and they left this weird imprint on me that I can still feel all these years later. I was 23 at the time that this happened, living alone in a small apartment complex near campus. I've always had trouble sleeping, and one thing that I sometimes do is kind of a mental projection thing. Basically, I try to picture myself walking around my apartment or the neighborhood in my head as vividly as possible, like I'm floating outside of my body. It's weird, I know, but it usually relaxes me and helps me drift off. This night, though, something felt off right from the start. I was doing the same thing that I usually do, imagining walking around the apartment, opening doors, looking out the windows, but I kept feeling this intense sense of, unease. Like someone or something was aware I was there, even though I was alone, and I shrugged it off and eventually went to bed. But when I woke up, I saw something. There was a figure standing near the doorway of my bedroom. It was tall, unnaturally thin, completely bald and pale, almost like its skin had no real texture. Its eyes were jet black, except the pupils were a sharp white glow, like something out of a low-budget horror movie. Its mouth was open in this strange sort of shape, like it was frozen mid-scream. I couldn't see any hair, eyebrows, or other facial features. I also don't think it had any clothing, but I honestly couldn't tell if the shadows were hiding details or if it really wasn't wearing anything. Whatever the case, I froze. My first thought was, is that my dad? Because he's the only other adult that I'd expect to see around the apartment at that hour. But no, this wasn't anyone that I knew. The weirdest part? I didn't feel immediately threatened. It wasn't moving aggressively or lunging or anything. In fact, it almost seemed scared itself. It tilted its head slightly, like it was curious but also nervous. I couldn't explain it, but I almost felt empathetic toward it, like it wasn't there to hurt me. I asked out loud, "Can I help you?" And immediately it just backed away and vanished. Not like it ran, but like it was gone in an instant, blinked out of existence. No noise, no footsteps, just gone. I didn't sleep much after that. I even set up my phone camera pointing toward the doorway in case it returned, but nothing ever showed up again. I've told a few friends about this, and one of them insists that it was a kind of demon. I don't know if that's true. Part of me thinks that it was some sort of sleep hallucination or something like that, but it felt too real for that, really. The presence, the way that it looked at me, the way that it disappeared like that, and the fact that I stayed up until dawn, I don't think it was just my imagination. Even now thinking about it makes my stomach tighten. I haven't had a sleep projection experience since then, and honestly, I don't plan on trying it again anytime soon. So, do you guys have any idea as to what this could be. This came up a couple of years ago at a family barbecue, and honestly, it stuck with me ever since because of just how everybody reacted. My partner's family had a big get-together. It was sometime in 2019. Nothing special, just one of those backyard things where everybody shows up. There's too much food, kids are running around, people drinking, telling old stories, that sort of thing. At one point, a bunch of cousins were sitting around a table, talking about dumb stuff they did as kids at their grandparents' house. Stuff like sneaking lollies, breaking things and blaming each other, hiding from their parents when they were supposed to be doing chores. Then one of the cousins, her name was Rachel, randomly said something like, "Do you guys remember that weird little guy in the laundry room?" The reaction was immediate. There were 5 of them sitting there, and every single one of them went quiet at the same time. It was actually kind of uncomfortable. A couple of them looked at each other, like she had just brought up something that they weren't supposed to talk about. One of the guys laughed it off, and said something like, "Don't start that again." Another cousin straight up said that he didn't want to talk about it. That alone got my attention, because they had been joking about everything else up to that point. Later that night I asked my partner what that was about, and he told me that when they were kids, around 9 or 10 years old, they used to spend a lot of time at their grandparents' old house. It was an older place with a sort of half-finished lower level where the washing machine and the storage stuff was. Apparently the kids weren't supposed to go down there because there were tools and shelves and jars of preserved food or whatever. Naturally, that's exactly where they like to hang out. According to him, one afternoon a bunch of them went down there, messing around while the adults were upstairs. He said that one of his cousins knocked a jar off of a shelf and it smashed on the concrete floor. Everyone started panicking because they knew that they were about to get in trouble. While they were arguing about who was going to take the blame, someone noticed movement behind one of the storage racks. He told me that they all saw it. He said that it looked like a very small person, maybe half or almost a meter tall, standing in the darker part of the room near the wall. He described it as looking like an old man, thin face, wrinkled skin, messy grey hair, and it was wearing what looked like dirty work clothes, like a tiny mechanic or something like that, as ridiculous as that sounds. At first they thought that maybe it was a trick of the light, or someone crouching behind something, but it stood up straight and looked directly at them, and then it spoke. My partner said the voice sounded rough, like someone older. The thing basically told them that they shouldn't be down there, and that kids who break things end up paying for it later. That was pretty much the exact wording that he remembered anyway. He told me the weird part though is that none of them screamed or ran right away. They sort of just stood there for a few seconds, staring at it. Then someone bolted up the stairs and everyone followed. They never went down there again after that. What stuck with me though was just how casually my partner explained it. He didn't say it like it was some big traumatic event, more like a strange thing from childhood that they never really figured out. After hearing that, I asked the other cousin about it later that night. Once they realized my partner had already told me, they started comparing what they remembered. What's odd is that their descriptions were almost identical, even though they hadn't talked about it in like years. Same size, same old man look, same spot in the room. One of them even remembered the broken jar part exactly the same way too. But the moment that they started getting into details, one of the older cousins shut the conversation down. He said that the whole thing creeped him out, and that he didn't want to keep talking about it. And the vibe changed immediately. Everyone just sort of dropped it after that. I tried coming up with some normal explanations for it. Maybe it was a neighbor messing with them or someone playing a prank. But the room they described was small and the only exit was the stairs that they ran up as far as I know. Also, 5 kids all remembering basically the same thing decades later is a little bit weird, right? I obviously don't know what it was. Some people say kids can misinterpret things or build shared memories over time. That could easily be it, I suppose. Still though, the way that their faces changed when the topic came up made it feel like it wasn't just some made-up childhood story. Has anyone else heard of a group of kids seeing the same strange thing like that when they were younger? I'm curious if there's some kind of psychological explanation for it, or if anyone else has had something similar happen to them growing up. It's a weird story, I know, but I tell it as they told me. I'm 30 now, and I still cannot make sense of what happened. Or, honestly, I'm not even sure if it ever really truly stopped. Whatever the case, it all started when I was 7. My parents both worked long hours, so most of my days were spent at my grandparents' house. One evening, my grandparents were watching TV in the living room, and my grandfather, who had a weird sense of humor, joked that my parents had abandoned me and weren't coming back. Naturally, I believed him. I wandered into the hallway crying, and that's when I first saw it. I hesitate to call it a him because, well, it didn't feel human, but I froze completely. My legs, arms, everything gone. I couldn't scream or even move my eyes. From the guest bedroom at the far end of the hall, a shadow emerged. It was tall, way taller than any human should be in that small hallway, thin with what looked like a misshapen head. Its face was just black. I could make out sort of 2 pinprick-like eyes and a wide, unnatural smile that stretched way too far across where a mouth should be, but it moved toward me, slowly and deliberately. Then I have no memory of what happened next. One moment I remember being paralyzed, the next my grandmother was scooping me up, saying that I'd fallen asleep in the hallway. But it didn't end there. For years afterward, the same thing kept happening. Walking down the hallway, stepping out of the bathroom, sitting at the table, the numbness would sort of hit me, my vision would tunnel, and that presence would appear. Sometimes it just stood in the corner, other times it would sit across from me, silent, unblinking. It never spoke, well, until I was 11. My parents had left me in the house alone one afternoon while they went to the market one day. I was drawing at the kitchen table. The windows were wide open. It was summer, 2005, and no air conditioning. Then the paralysis hit again. I looked up, and it was just outside of the kitchen window, staring in. And this time, it spoke. "Let me in. I can't come in unless you let me in." I couldn't move. I just stared. Eventually, the feeling lifted, and I ran upstairs screaming. My parents came back later to me, shaken and crying. They told me that it was my imagination. But this continued off and on for years. Sleep deprivation, fear, the usual kid's imagination explanation from adults. When I was 14, my mother finally took me to a woman who claimed that she could help with sensitive children. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that she wasn't exactly mainstream, but she said that my awareness was open and could be closed. I remember fragments, being spun, being carried, a low fire burning nearby. Nothing malicious physically happened, but I felt the energy shift. After that too, for years, it stopped appearing. Until recently. 2 years ago, I was back at my grandparents' house. My grandfather had passed, and my grandmother was asleep in her room. I tried to nap in the guest room, yes, the same one, and woke up to something hitting me on the head hard enough to knock me on the floor. I bolted out of the room and didn't touch that space again. I even checked the window, it was closed. I blamed it on a dream until I woke up with a bump the next morning. I tried not to think too much of it though, until last year when I was talking to my younger brother about old times. He casually mentioned seeing the same figure when we were kids apparently. Tall, dark, smiling, same guest room and same presence. Upon hearing that, I nearly lost it, I swear. We compared notes. The memories matched almost perfectly. We'd both been trying to dismiss it for years as well, thinking that we were both imagining things. Curious now, too, we asked our aunt about it. She's more spiritually aware than most of the family. She confirmed weird stuff happened there for years, apparently. Unexplained broken eggs on walls, light bulbs exploding randomly, appliances shorting out when we had just bought them. She said that my grandfather even hired a local imam, like a spiritual blessing equivalent, to try and clear it, which apparently worked sort of temporarily. The disturbances would always return, though. Most recently, there was an electrical short that left the house without power for 3 days, and the electricians just couldn't explain it. Now, to answer some common questions that I know usually come up, I didn't ask my grandmother about the entity. I didn't want to scare her. Every detail is real as far as I know, and I don't think that this is sleep paralysis. I mean, I and my brother were fully awake for all of the encounters. No one died in that house as far as I know besides my grandfather. The house was apparently built in the 1970s. No other family lived there. The guest room used to be a part of the kitchen before renovations, and that's the room that seems linked to whatever this thing is. I'm sharing this too because I want to know if anyone has any idea as to what this thing could be. Especially because, well, the scariest part is knowing that my brother saw it too. If he hadn't have said anything, then I probably would have gone throughout life just thinking that it was my own imagination. But knowing that he saw something too, well, that just doesn't sit with me right, and I think there's more to this. So, if you have any thoughts, then please do share. I don't usually share this story because of just how weird it sounds, I know that, but here goes nothing. So when I was a kid, I was obsessed with magical and weird stuff. I thought that I saw things all the time, little flashes, shadows moving, things out of the corner of my eye. By the time that I hit 15, I had pretty much convinced myself that that was it. My brain was just overactive, or I was just sort of seeing things that didn't exist. One summer when I was about 15, I was helping my dad with his lawn and landscaping business. We were cleaning up a property that he was contracted to prep for a sale. I'd only been there once before, and the place was empty, probably between owners, I would guess. I was moving a tangled brush pile from between two large trees so that we could burn or chip it later. One of the branches was massive, and I had to really wrestle it to pull it free. And that was when I felt it. A small hand shot out from inside of the bush and grabbed my gloved hand. Not like a bird's claw or a squirrel or something. This was human. Not a kid's hand either. It was tiny, sure, but it looked like a fully formed old man's hand. What I confirmed later looked like liver spots, slightly greyish skin, hairy knuckles even. It gripped me like it knew exactly what it was doing too. I froze. I tried to rationalize it. Some sort of weird critter, I thought. But the dexterity and the way that it wrapped around my finger like that was way too precise. I yanked my hand back, obviously, terrified, and then it screamed. It was sort of like a human scream, pitched unnaturally high, almost animalistic, and it reverberated weirdly in my ears, like it shook the air around me. My dad, who was about 30 meters away at the front of the house, he stopped what he was doing, clearly startled, but he didn't see anything. I clawed through the brush to get a good look, and for just a second I caught a glimpse of a small dark figure moving down into the pile. Not fully visible, but just enough to know that it wasn't a branch or a shadow. By the time that I could think, it was gone though. Nothing moved anymore. I even shifted the brush a foot away from where it had appeared to see if it would come out again, but it didn't. And I never saw it again. Years later, I started reading about screen memories, from alien encounters and things that people report seeing that later don't make any sense, Flashes, partial glimpses, moments that feel real but are impossible to explain. And when I look back, that brief vision of that hand and the dark figure makes more sense in that context. It almost feels like a screen memory, a fragment that shields the actual experience. Even now I can remember the exact sensation of that grip. Not fear exactly, but awareness. A weird pressure like it was studying me. For a moment it seemed like it wasn't hostile, just calculating, and then it vanished. I've never seen anything like it again. No flashes, no figures, no noises, but sometimes when I'm alone in a forest or moving piles of sticks for work or whatever, I feel that same brush of awareness, almost like it's watching, waiting for a second chance. I have no idea what it was, too. Human, animal, something else entirely, I don't know. It felt intelligent, like it knew what it was doing, but I don't know if it was malicious in that moment, just present. Like I said, it's a really weird experience, and for that reason I just don't tell it to many people. But even now, all these years later, I can still feel that grip on my finger in my mind. So this happened when I was around 12. My family rented a place for a week in a quiet seaside suburb. It was a nice neighborhood, and the first night that we were there, I really just couldn't sleep. The house made that usual settling noise, but at around, I would say, 1:45 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside of the bedroom that I was sharing with my younger sister. Slow, soft, and definitely barefoot. I assumed it was my dad getting up to use the bathroom. The footsteps stopped just outside of our door, though, and then nothing. No running water, no bathroom door opening, no creak from the hall boards. Beyond that, complete silence. I debated waking my sister, or even getting up to check myself, but I didn't in the end. The next morning, I mentioned it casually at breakfast. My dad looked at me like I'd lost it. He hadn't gotten up at all. Mum said the same, and so I brushed it off. Old houses, weird noises, whatever. The second night, though, it happened again. Same timing, same slow, measured footsteps outside of our room. But this time I noticed something else. A soft dragging sound along the bedroom door, like someone's fingernails tracing down the wood. Not scratching hard, but just sliding. I froze. My sister was asleep, and I didn't wake her. I didn't want her thinking that I was losing it too. I stared at the crack under the door, expecting a shadow or maybe a reflection, but nothing. Morning eventually came, though, and I checked the door. No marks, no scratches, nothing unusual at all. The third night, though, I decided that if it happened again, I would open the door this time. Around 2 a.m., the footsteps returned. Same slow, deliberate pace, stopping right outside of the door. My chest felt like it was trying to escape my body, but then 3 soft taps, perfectly spaced, like somebody was trying politely to knock. I forced myself out of bed, swung the door open, and when I did, the hallway was completely empty. There was nothing. Here's the part, though, that still sticks with me. So, the air in the hallway felt different. That's the best way that I can put it. Heavier and sort of colder, like someone had just been standing there. I checked my parents' room, both asleep. Nobody else had access to the rental, and after that night, the footsteps never returned. I don't know why they stopped. Years later, I asked my sister if she remembered anything weird from that trip, and she sort of went quiet for a second, then said, "You mean the knocking?" I never told her about those taps, but apparently she saw me get up and open the door and everything. Even now, I still remember the feeling of the air that night, and it creeps me out massively. It wasn't loud or violent or anything, but there was something about the measured pace in those steps that made it feel even worse, deliberate, like whatever was out there was testing me. This has been going on for a while now, and I figured that I should put it out there, at least somewhere. Not sure if anyone will relate to it, but here it is. So I live with my grandma in a small trailer in a rural area. The place is right near some old mining tunnels that were shut down decades ago, and from what I've read, a few people died in collapses and accidents there. I didn't think too much about it when we moved in, but now I kind of do. The trailer's one level, no attic, no basement, 4 locks on each door, and windows are always shut. We had an alarm system for years as well, so there's no way anyone could have just got inside. The layout's pretty simple. Kitchen and living room are open, the door to my grandma's room is in the living area, and the only hallway leads to my room. The first weird thing that I noticed was in the living room, around 5:30 in the morning. It was still dark, and my cat Smokey was sitting on my lap while I was reading, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw something black sort of peeking from behind the armchair, just watching me. The second that I made eye contact with it, it ducked behind the chair though. I stayed there for a bit, unsure if I had actually seen what I had seen. But then I realized that my cat was staring at the same spot too. This repeated itself for over an hour as well. I didn't go back to my room at the time too, because it seemed like it moved in that direction. Then there were the footsteps, heavy, like boots, walking up to my door, stopping and just staying there. I never heard them leave. Motion sensors didn't trigger. My grandma doesn't wear boots inside, obviously, and she wasn't awake. Another night at around 2 in the morning, I was in her room as well, 5 feet away from her, and heard footsteps circling the living room. I started noticing shadows more often then as well. And one night in my room, I saw a dark shape in the corner, and when I looked directly at it, it ducked like it didn't want to be seen again. But then it reappeared at the foot of my bed, doing the same thing. Another time, on the ceiling corner, I saw what looked like a head with a 6-horn-like projection to it. My first thought was, I must be going mad, but my cat was staring straight at it too again, hair standing on end, and she was hissing. The scariest moment was in late October, though. I was in the kitchen reading at the table. My grandma was outside talking to someone. My foot was resting on a chair, completely still, when, out of nowhere, the chair got yanked back like somebody grabbed it and pulled hard. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I've had this being watched feeling for years now, and I remember vague things from when I was like 4 or 5, like hearing voices under my bed. Hard to say if it was anything actually, but there's also been tapping on walls, a single knock on my door that didn't trigger the motion sensor, and loud slams outside the trailer that nobody else seemed to notice but me. But then again, even my grandma occasionally hears weird noises that she cannot explain either. Pets notice it too. Every cat and dog that we've had stares at corners, sometimes barking or growling, but there's nothing there. And it's always pretty consistent as well. Honestly, I don't feel physically threatened by anything, but it's like there's a presence that just observes and tests limits here. It's been happening more frequently over the last 6 months, and now I'm not the only one noticing too. My grandma caught a shadow move in the living room while she was inside. One night my dog went into full alert mode, growling and backing up at a corner that I was staring at. But again, there was nothing there that was visible. At this point, I don't know what it is. It's not violent, thankfully, but it is certainly very unnerving. It follows me around the trailer, moves objects subtly, and leaves that feeling in my chest that I'm being watched constantly as well. I'm thinking of setting up some cameras, but even if I do catch something, I don't know what I would do next. If anyone has dealt with something like this, especially attached to a person or a small living space, I would really appreciate any advice you can give me. I'm not sure if it's like residual energy from the mines, or if whatever this has latched onto me or us, but either way, it's exhausting just being home sometimes, and I'm really getting sick of it. So I've been thinking about this memory for years, and honestly, I still don't know what to make of it. I'm sharing this because, well, maybe someone else out there has experienced something similar, or maybe there's a legit psychological explanation for it that I just haven't thought of. This happened way back in 1985, and I was living with my grandparents in a small town near Marysville, Washington. I was around 2 or 3 years old at the time, and even though I was tiny, this memory has stuck with me perfectly all these years. My crib, it was in their living room, right next to a big floor-to-ceiling window that looked out into the thick patch of woods there. The house was tucked back from the road, with no neighbors in sight. One afternoon I was put down for a nap, and when I woke up, it was quiet except for this soft sort of tapping against the window. I got up in my crib, and that's when I saw it, a figure standing outside. I can't describe it as human exactly, but it was humanoid in shape. But whatever it was massive, almost filling the height of the window and completely dark. Not a shadow and not fog, but just thick black and a shape. It didn't move like a person, it almost shimmered in fact, like it wasn't completely solid. At first, being how young I was, I suspect, I didn't feel scared. It leaned toward the glass though, just sort of watching me. But then it did something weird. It cupped its hands around its face and made this gesture like it was trying to see me better, and then waved. I remember laughing and waving back, and it honestly felt kind of silly, like someone playing peekaboo. But then it changed. The hands went upside down, palms facing the face now, fingers pointing down, and it sort of leaned closer to the glass. I don't know why, but the second that it did that, terror hit me like a wall as well. I remember my chest tightening and my stomach sort of being full of butterflies, and I just screamed. Not a quiet toddler scream as well, but full-on hysterical. My grandmother came running, and I could barely breathe, I was crying so hard. When she looked out the window was empty. My grandfather checked the yard and around the house, but nobody was there. The woods were silent, and it just didn't make any sense. But I knew that I had seen something, and I was trying to communicate this with them. Being so young at the time, it was hard, but there was no trace left. Even now, though, when I think about it, I get that same heavy pit in my stomach. I know that childhood memories can be unreliable or reconstructed over time, but I've never remembered it differently. The shift from playful to horrifying was so real, and it's always so vivid in my memory too. I've wondered a lot about what could explain it. Could it have been just my imagination at the time? Could a 2-year-old brain interpret natural shadows or light in such a distorted, intense way like that? Or was it something else? Has anyone else here had a memory from super early childhood that involved a humanoid figure like this, that started playful and then instantly became terrifying? Also, don't be afraid to question this, because I'd like to hear if there's a neurological or psychological explanation for it, or if maybe someone has seen something like this themselves. Even after all these years, I sometimes get flashes of that figure in the corner of my mind, and it's one of the earliest things that I can remember, and it's stayed with me for, well, over 40 years now. So this is something that happened when I was really young, and it's one of those memories that has just never faded or changed over time. I don't automatically assume it was anything paranormal, but I still don't have a clean or clear explanation for it. So when I was about 5, my family moved into an old 2-story house in a rural area. The place was built sometime in the early 1900s and had clearly been renovated in pieces over the years. Because the upstairs bedrooms were unusually large, my parents decided to put all 3 of us kids in the same room. I had just gotten my own bed, my older brother had his across the room, and my baby brother slept in a crib near the wall. Now one night I woke up randomly for some reason. There wasn't any noise that woke me. It was just one of those sort of sudden wake-ups where you instantly are alert. The room was dim because of some street light coming through the curtains, and when I looked down at the side of my bed, I noticed something that immediately made my stomach drop. It looked like long black shapes rising slowly from the floor on both sides of me. The easiest way to describe it is that they sort of looked like arms, but they weren't attached to anything. They didn't look solid either, more like darkness that was thicker than the rest of the room, and they weren't moving fast. They were just slowly lifting upward toward the mattress. I remember freezing at first, like I couldn't even move. Then I looked across the room and saw my older brother sitting up in his bed, staring down at the same thing happening next to him. That part is what stuck with me the most too over the years. It wasn't just me seeing something weird. He clearly saw it too. We both started yelling for our dad at the same time. He slept downstairs because he worked early mornings, but he never came up. The shapes, they didn't react to the noise at all as well. They just kept rising a little higher until they were level with the top of the mattress. At some point, I got angry instead of scared as well, and I don't know why, but probably just a kid reaction. I remember sort of yelling something like, "Go away" or "Stop it." And the moment that I did that, the shapes slowly lowered back down until they disappeared completely. At the time, I hoped that that would be the end of it too, I remember thinking, but it wasn't. After that, I noticed movement around my bed. There were multiple figures standing nearby. They weren't detailed enough to see faces clearly, but they had defined outlines enough and looked human-sized in posture. The best way that I could describe them as a kid was that they looked like people wearing long robes or cloaks maybe. That wasn't based on any sort of religion or anything. It was just the closest comparison that my brain had at the time. Now, they didn't speak, but they acted like they were sort of interacting with each other. They would move from my bed to my brother's bed and then toward the crib. It looked almost like they were sort of checking on each of us one by one. None of this lasted very long, but eventually they moved towards the window and then were just, well, gone. Not like they walked away, but like they faded out once they reached that area. The next morning, my brother and I both brought it up without prompting each other. We described basically the same thing, and we were kids, and so we called them space people. Mostly because that was the only idea that we had that fit something that didn't make any sense at the time. Our dad, well, he laughed it off and told us that we were dreaming. After that, though, my brother refused to talk about it for years. When we were teenagers, though, it finally came back up again during a family conversation at one point. And that's when he admitted that he had definitely seen something that night. He tried to rationalize it by saying that maybe we were half asleep and interpreting shadows from the outside or something. But I can tell you that there weren't any trees near that house, and the way that the shapes moved didn't match anything like that. There were also other strange things in that house too, though none were ever as intense as that night. Like, if I went upstairs alone, I would sometimes hear quick scraping sounds in my parents' room, like something dragging lightly across the floor sometimes. It only ever happened when I was there by myself, and if somebody else was nearby, it stopped completely. The weird part, though, is that everything stopped around the same time that I hit my early teens. No more sounds, no more visual stuff. In fact, there was nothing anymore. Looking back now as an adult, I really don't know what to make of it. But the fact that my brother and I both described the same details independently like that, well, that part still bothers me a lot. I don't jump straight to like haunted house or anything, but I also can't fully explain why that one night was so vivid and consistent for both of us. It's one of those memories, I guess, that just sort of sits there without any clear answer. This happened when I was in high school in the early 90s, in a small town in Iowa. This was way before everyone had cell phones, cameras everywhere, or doorbell cams, which meant that if something weird did happen around your house, half the time nobody believed you unless they actually saw it themselves. Our house sat right by the edge of a long bike trail that used to be an old railway line. During the day, people walked dogs or rode bikes through there, but at night it was basically empty. The back of our yard faced the trail too, with nothing but a short chain-link fence separating it. The first time that I noticed anything strange, I honestly thought that I was just being paranoid too. So I woke up one night at around 1 or 2 in the morning with that feeling like something was standing nearby. You know that feeling when you're suddenly wide awake for no obvious reason? My bedroom window faced the backyard and the blinds were closed, but not perfectly. There were small gaps where you could see outside. At first I didn't see anything, but after a minute I noticed movement in the yard, like someone shifting their weight or something. It looked like a person standing near the fence line. I couldn't see details, just a dark silhouette or an outline. I assumed it was someone walking the trail and looking into the yards for whatever reason, but it creeped me out a bit, but I convinced myself that it wasn't a big deal. But then it started happening more often. Every few nights I'd wake up with that same feeling. Sometimes I'd hear a faint sound nearby near the window, like someone brushing their hand against the screen or lightly tapping the frame or something. But once I heard what sounded like someone breathing outside too. Not loud, but close enough that it made my skin crawl for sure. I told my parents after the 3rd or 4th time about this, and my dad checked outside with a flashlight one night, but of course there was never anyone there when he looked. After a while, too, they started assuming that it was just animals or maybe branches hitting the house or something. But one night, during the summer, I heard something that was different from the usual noises. It sounded like someone slowly dragging their fingers across the metal screen on my window, not scratching aggressively, but just sort of lightly running it along the mesh. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, and then it stopped. That was the first time, too, that I ran straight into my parents' room. My dad grabbed a baseball bat and went outside, but again, there was nothing. No one in the yard, nothing on the trail, no footprints or anything. But after that, they started locking the backyard gate at night, but the weird stuff, it kept happening. Eventually, too, I sort of just got used to it in a strange way. I still hated it, but I stopped reacting every time. Months went by like this, too. Then winter hit and everything changed. One morning, my dad was outside shoveling snow and he noticed footprints behind the house. They came from the bike trail, walked straight up to my bedroom window, and then went back that same way. Just one set of prints, but whoever it was had clearly been standing right outside of my room. After that, though, my parents finally took me seriously. My dad installed a motion light facing the yard, and for a while, thankfully, nothing happened. But then one night, it all kind of came together. My parents were out at a friend's house, and I had 2 friends over. We were getting ready to go to a movie, and one of my friends went to my room to grab something and immediately yelled for us. We walked in, and the motion light outside was on. When I looked at the window, there was a man as well, standing about a foot away from the glass, staring directly inside. And he wasn't trying to hide it at all. He looked rough too, like somebody who hadn't slept in days. Messy hair, dirty jacket, just standing there watching us like we were something interesting on a TV screen. All 3 of us started yelling at the same time. The guy didn't move right away either, which made it worse. He just kept staring for a couple of seconds before slowly walking off toward the trail. We locked ourselves in the bathroom and we called the police instantly from the kitchen phone. They showed up about 15 minutes later, but obviously the guy was long gone by then. The officers walked around the yard and the trail, but they didn't find anyone, and they were polite, but you could tell that they thought that we might have exaggerated things. A couple of weeks later, something weird happened that made my stomach drop. My mother had the local paper on the table, and there was a story about a man who had been arrested a few towns over for breaking into houses and watching people through windows. Apparently, he had been caught after someone saw him trying to get into the back door late at night, and that mugshot photo, I will never forget it. It looked exactly like the guy that I saw outside of my window, down to the clothes and everything. I don't know how long he had been coming around our house for before I noticed him, but it could have been weeks, could have been months, maybe even a year. The police never contacted us about it, and we never followed up either, but after he got arrested, I can say that the noises outside of my window, they stopped completely. To this day, I still sleep with my blinds fully closed. That whole experience kind of burned the habit into me, I think. And yeah, whoever that guy was, I'm really glad he eventually got caught, because looking back on it now, the fact that he stood outside of my window that many times without anyone noticing it is honestly the scariest part of the whole thing. So this happened a few years ago when my wife and I went on a trip after getting married. Not exactly a big honeymoon or anything, more like a quick getaway because we both had to go back to work soon. This was in 2021 as well, and we booked a small hotel in Vietnam because the reviews online were pretty solid and the photos looked decent too. The first thing that I'll admit is that I am a bit paranoid about hidden cameras. I've seen way too many posts online about people finding them in hotel rooms, and so when we checked in and got to our room, before we even unpacked, I did a quick sweep around the place. I checked smoke detectors, vents, behind the TV, inside the bathroom mirror cabinet, all that stuff. Nothing looked weird. The room itself was pretty small though. Bed, small couch, TV mounted on the wall, mini fridge, and a table near the window with a decorative metal box sitting on it. It looked like one of those gift boxes hotels leave with like snacks for guests or whatever. It had some wrapped dried fruit inside and also a little note welcoming us. At first I didn't think too much of it. Later that evening, though, I was standing near the window looking out at the street, and I noticed that the box felt heavier than it should have when I moved it to grab something underneath. It was one of those small details where your brain kind of pauses for a second. So I picked it up again and turned it over. On the bottom there was a sort of thin rectangular panel that didn't quite match the rest of the metal. It looked almost like a battery cover that you'd see in a TV remote or something. That immediately set off alarm bells in my head. I tried to open it with my fingers, but it wouldn't move. Then I grabbed a butter knife from the little dining area tray and carefully pushed it into the seam. After a bit of pressure as well, the panel popped open. Inside was a small circuit board and a micro SD card, and in the center of it was a tiny camera lens pointed outward through a pinhole in the metal design. For a few seconds, I honestly just stood there holding it, trying to process what I was looking at. I could hardly believe my eyes. I know about these things, but, you never really think that it's going to be you that is subject to it, right? My wife thought that I was joking at first too, until I showed her inside of the box, and it was around 11:30 at night, and the front desk phone in the room kept ringing to an automated message saying the line was busy. We tried calling the main hotel number from our phones, but nobody picked up. At that point, we were both very uncomfortable, but also exhausted from travel, so we ended up unplugging the camera board and putting everything back inside of the box. I figured that we would deal with it in the morning with the manager. But then something else started happening that night. Around 1 a.m. we heard the door handle move. Not a loud bang or someone trying to kick the door in or anything, but just a slow turning of the handle like somebody was checking if it was unlocked. We both froze upon hearing it. I got up and looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty as far as I could see. I assumed maybe someone had the wrong room number or something. Hotels can be weird like that sometimes. The next morning, we were downstairs and asked about the manager. The guy at the front desk told us that he wouldn't be in until the afternoon. We showed him the box and asked why there was a camera inside of it. He looked genuinely confused, but also not shocked. He said that the hotel buys these boxes from a supplier, and that he'd never seen one opened before like that. He told us that he would report it to the management, and he apologized. It was a really weird response, to be honest, but we didn't really know what to do at that point. We decided to just keep the camera parts with us and see what the manager said later. That night, too, was when things started getting a whole lot worse. At about midnight, the same thing happened again with the door handle. Except this time, whoever was on the other side tried it several times, slowly turning it left and right like they were hoping the latch might give way. I opened the peephole again, and this time I caught a glimpse of someone walking away down the hallway. I didn't get to see their face, though. The next morning, we asked the front desk again about the manager, and again we were told that he wasn't available yet. That was starting to feel suspicious, too. We decided to stay one more night because our flights weren't until later that week anyway, but we pushed a chair against the door just in case this time. And night 3 was definitely the absolute worst. Around 2:30 in the morning, the handle started moving again, but this time whoever it was put actual force into it. Not kicking the door down, but clearly trying to open it. The chair that we had wedged against the door rattled when the handle turned. My wife grabbed my arm and whispered that someone was definitely trying to get inside. I went to the door and shouted that I was calling the police. The handle stopped immediately, and I looked through the peephole again, and saw someone standing at the far end of the hallway near the stairs. They quickly turned the corner and disappeared before I could get a good look. After that, though, neither of us slept. The next morning, we packed everything, and we checked out 2 days earlier than we had planned. When we told the front desk what had been happening, they acted surprised again and said that they'd review the hallway cameras. We never did hear anything back from them, and to this day we still don't know who put that camera in that box or why someone kept trying to get into our room at night. But the whole hotel was really suspicious in the end. Maybe it was just one person working at the hotel. Maybe it was someone who thought the room was empty and wanted to steal stuff or something. I have no idea, but that trip was supposed to be our honeymoon, and instead we spent the last 3 nights sleeping with a chair jammed under the door, taking turns staying awake. I grew up in a small town in eastern Kentucky, maybe 3,000 people if you count the surrounding farms there. Everyone knew everyone's business around this place, which honestly made this whole thing so much worse. So, the person involved is my mum's mother. I'll just call her Carol here. I cut all contact with her when I was around 8 or 9, and I haven't spoken to her since. That was more than a decade ago as well. Unfortunately, though, she never really accepted that. Carol has always had serious mental health problems, you see. I'm not saying that as an insult, too. I mean actual documented issues. My mum grew up dealing with a lot of manipulation and some pretty rough abuse in that house. My grandfather wasn't exactly stable either. My mum told me later that she used to kick holes in the walls and once cracked one of her ribs during an argument. Stuff like that. By the time that I was born, my mum had already moved out and tried to put distance between them. But Carol never really stopped trying to stay involved in our lives. At first, it was just constant phone calls and showing up randomly, but then it escalated into something way more obsessive. When I was about 7, Carol actually tried to go through the courts to get visitation rights with me. In Kentucky, that kind of thing is technically possible in some cases, but the judge shut it down pretty quickly because of the harassment complaints my parents had already filed. And so, instead of getting access to me, she ended up with a temporary restraining order. That didn't slow her down much, though. The first time that I remember being genuinely scared of her, too, was during a 4th of July festival that our town used to do every year. This was a sort of parade that went down the main road past the courthouse and ended near the river park. I was walking with a youth baseball group at the time, and at some point I heard someone shouting my name from the sidewalk. I turned and saw Carol pushing through the crowd trying to get to me. She was yelling stuff about how my parents were keeping me from her, and I froze because I didn't know what to do. My dad was driving one of the trucks in the parade a little ahead of us, and he noticed the commotion. He pulled over, grabbed me, and put me in the truck cab. Someone called the police, and they ended up escorting her away. I remember then being more embarrassed than anything because half the town saw it happen. But a couple of years later, she tried something even worse. So one morning she actually showed up at my elementary school. My parents had already warned the school about her and given them photos just in case, but somehow she still made it inside of the building. The office called my classroom and told my teacher someone was there to pick me up early. I said no immediately and started freaking out. I remember crying and refusing to go anywhere near the hallway. My teacher figured that something was wrong and locked the classroom door while she called the office back. Turns out, Carol was down there insisting that she had permission to take me home. The school ended up going into a partial lockdown while they waited for the police and my mother to arrive. After that incident, the restraining order got upgraded and the school was told not to let her anywhere near the property ever again. For a while after that, things went quiet too. Then, when I was 9, my little brother was born. And not long after that, my parents decided that we were done dealing with the situation and moved us out of state to southern Indiana, and I didn't fully understand why at the time, but it made sense later. Even after the move, Carol kept trying to track us down. In fact, over the years, she'd made dozens of fake social media profiles, sent emails to random addresses that she thought might belong to me, and tried messaging my friends pretending to be somebody else. Most of it got blocked pretty quickly, but every once in a while, something would slip through. And the weirdest thing that I learned about her came much later. When I was 20, I went back to my hometown for the first time since we had moved away, mostly just to see what the place looked like now. While I was there, I knocked on the door of the guy who used to live next to us, and we talked for a while, and eventually he brought up my grandmother. He said that after we moved out, she kept showing up around our old house at night, and apparently she would walk around the yard shining a flashlight into the windows, even though nobody lived there anymore. A couple of times, he saw her sitting on the curb across the street just staring at the place. He also told me that apparently she used to wander onto his porch late at night, bouncing a basketball for no reason. And one time, she even started yelling at his security camera like she thought somebody inside was watching her. He ended up calling the police on her more than once, and hearing that honestly made my skin crawl a little bit because it confirmed that none of it was just childhood exaggeration. She really was that obsessive. As far as I know, she still lives somewhere in that county, and every once in a while a new fake account pops up trying to message me, but I block them as soon as I realize who it is. At this point, I don't feel angry about it anymore, just very, very cautious. If she ever did try to approach me again, I probably would just go straight to the police, but after everything that happened growing up, there's one thing that I'm completely sure about. I have zero interest in ever seeing her again. This happened a while ago, sometime around 1987 or 1988, I think. I was about 13 at the time and my younger brother was 10, and we lived in a small town in northern England, the kind of place where most kids walked home from school because nothing ever really happened there. Our walk home was the same every day. Leave school, cut through a few residential streets, pass a row of little shops, then head down a quieter road that eventually led to our neighborhood. We'd done that walk probably 100 times at least by that point, and one afternoon, something just felt off. We were maybe 10 minutes from school when I noticed a guy sitting on a low stool near the curb. He had a little setup in front of him with tools and some old shoes or something. I remember thinking that he was probably repairing them for money because he had a sign next to him and a small box of supplies. Normally, I wouldn't have thought too much about it too, but when we walked past him, he looked directly at my brother, not at me, and the look was what really bothered me. It wasn't just somebody casually noticing kids walking by. He watched him in a way that made him feel predatory. It's hard to explain it better than that, but it was just sort of a gut reaction where your brain tells you that something is wrong before you fully understand why. My brother, he didn't notice anything. He was talking about a football match at school or something and kicking a little rock along the pavement like kids do. But as we passed the guy, I glanced back for a second and saw him stand up. At first, he just walked in the same direction as us, but he stayed a little distance behind, maybe 15 or 20 meters. Not super close, but certainly close enough that I could see that he wasn't stopping anywhere. I started paying attention to the reflections in the shop windows at this point and the parked cars as well. Every time that I checked, he was still there behind us too. My brother kept chatting like normal. Meanwhile, I was trying to figure out what to do without scaring him. The problem was that the route home, it got a lot quieter after the next intersection. Our street was basically all houses with long hedges and hardly anyone walking around in the afternoons. And if we kept going that way, it would just be us and him for sure. Right before that turn though, there was a small cafe that mostly served tea and sandwiches to older people. It wasn't fancy or anything, but it was always open after school hours. Without saying much, I grabbed my brother's backpack strap and steered him toward that door. He was confused immediately and asked why we were stopping. I just told him that we needed to wait a minute. We went inside and I walked straight past the tables toward the back where the restrooms were. There was a narrow hallway there with a window that looked out toward the street. My brother kept asking what was going on and complaining that he wanted to go home because we'd get in trouble from Mum. But I told him to stay quiet for a minute and to just trust me. After about maybe a minute, I carefully looked through the side window and the same man walked past the cafe. He slowed down right outside and then he stopped. He turned his head and looked both directions down the street like he was trying to figure out where we'd went. I could see him scanning the pavement and looking toward the corner where we should have been. He stood there for longer than I expected too, maybe about 2 minutes, and at the time it felt way longer because I was watching him the whole time, but eventually he shook his head, muttered something that I couldn't hear through the glass, and kept walking down the road. We stayed inside the cafe for another 10 minutes just to be safe. I bought a small drink so that it didn't look like we were hiding there, and when we finally left, we took a completely different way home that went past the main road, where there were always people around. After that day as well, I never took the original route again. It added about 15 extra minutes to the walk, but I didn't care. I also made sure that my brother walked next to me the entire way instead of running ahead like he normally did as well. At the time, he had no idea why I suddenly became so strict about where we walked. But a few months ago, we were talking about childhood memories during a family dinner, and he joked about how I used to act like some kind of bodyguard when we left school. That's when I finally told him what actually happened that afternoon. He just stared at me for a second and said that he didn't remember any of it. Which honestly makes sense because he never even noticed the guy behind us, but I did. I'm in my 50s now, and I can still picture that man standing on the pavement, looking around like he had just lost something important. Whatever his plan was, I'm glad that we never gave him the chance to actually work it out. Something happened to me about 8 years ago that still randomly pops into my head late at night. The reason why I'm thinking about it again now is because, well, last year, there was a violent assault reported in the same town where this happened, and some details about the suspect reminded me a lot of the guy that I met back then. I don't know if it's actually related or if my brain is just sort of connecting the dots that aren't there, but the whole thing has been bothering me again. This was around 2017 when I was 19 years old and going to a small community college in eastern Tennessee. I was living in the student apartments on campus. It wasn't a dorm exactly, but more like cheap off-campus housing that a lot of students used. At the time, I was dealing with a breakup, and honestly, just not in a great place mentally. Because of this as well, I had been talking online with this guy that I'd met through Instagram. Nothing serious, and just sort of messaging here and there for a few weeks. One night, really late as well, like around 1:45 in the morning late, my phone buzzes. It's him saying that he's outside of my building. I remember thinking that that was a bit weird immediately because I had never really told him exactly where I lived. I'd mentioned the college before, but that was about it, and when I asked how he knew where to go, he just sort of brushed it off and said that it was easy to figure out. He kept texting too, saying that he just wanted to talk and that he had driven a long way and it would be rude if I didn't at least come down for a minute. Eventually, I went outside. His car was parked near the entrance of the lot, and I remember feeling uneasy the second that I walked up to the passenger side window. Nothing specific, I guess, but just that feeling where your body is tense, even though you're trying to act normal. He was really good at talking, though. Very relaxed and very confident. The kind of person who makes you feel like you're being dramatic if you question anything. He asked me to get into the car so that we could talk at one point. I hesitated and told him that I wanted to text my sister his name and phone number first. I don't know why I said sister specifically, but it was just the first thing that came out. He laughed and said sure, no problem, but when I said that I also wanted to take a photo of him, he kind of brushed that part aside and started joking about how paranoid I was being. For some reason, though, that worked on me, and I felt embarrassed and sort of ended up getting into the car. We sat there talking for maybe 15 minutes. I told him not to start the engine because I wasn't planning on going anywhere, and he agreed at first. Then he turned the car on anyway, and slowly started rolling toward the exit of the parking lot while still talking. I remember saying something like, "Hey, I thought that we were just sitting here," and he said that he was hungry and that there was a fast food place open nearby, and that he would grab something for the both of us. He kept talking the whole time in a way that made it feel awkward to push back as well. Looking back now, that's probably the part that bothers me the most as well. He was really good at steering the situation without directly arguing. Well, we ended up in a drive-thru somewhere off the highway, and while we were waiting in line, he suddenly turned his phone toward me and took a photo with a flash on, no warning. I asked why he just did that, and he said something like, "You looked good in the lighting." It felt strange because, we weren't even dating and had barely met in person. After that, though, he drove me back to the apartment, and when I got out, he said something like, "See, I brought you back safe." I remember that line clearly because it sounded so weird, like it was meant to reassure me about something that I hadn't actually accused him of. For a few weeks, too, I didn't see him again. Then one night at around 2:30 in the morning, he texted saying that he was outside again. I probably should have just ignored it, but I didn't in the end. I went down to the parking lot and got into the car again. This time he immediately started driving before I even asked where we were going. And not long into the drive, I noticed a case of beer in the back seat with several cans already missing. I asked if he'd been drinking, and he said no. They were from earlier with his friends, apparently. After about 20 minutes, though, we ended up in a really quiet neighborhood that I didn't recognize. Mostly older houses and not a lot of lights on. He parked and said that he was staying at a friend's place. The house itself looked like someone had lived there years ago, but certainly not recently. There was furniture, but it had that slightly dusty sort of look to it, like nobody had used it in a long time. Inside, there was almost nothing that looked like it belonged to him. No bags, clothes, nothing except for a laptop that he pulled out and set on a table. At one point, we were sort of standing near the sliding door that led to a small balcony, and that's when something happened that still confuses me. He suddenly lifted what looked like a small air rifle and pressed the barrel against the side of my head. It happened so fast that I didn't even react at first. I remember asking him if he was serious because I could hear something inside the barrel moving when he shifted it, and it sounded more like little metal pellets. He didn't say anything for several seconds, just stood there holding it. Then he lowered it like nothing happened. After that, though, the entire mood changed, as you can probably imagine. He acted restless, almost like he didn't know what to do next. He sat on the couch and put on a movie from some sketchy streaming site, and at one point he started talking about a woman that he used to date and showed me photos of her on his phone and stuff. He kept saying that he couldn't contact her anymore, but never explained why. The whole time, though, I noticed that he had almost no personal items in this house. Like, not even a toothbrush, no charger cables, nothing that suggested that he actually lived there. Later that night, he tried doing something that crossed a line for me as well, and I had to physically stop him. I stayed calm about it because I didn't want the situation to escalate. But eventually morning came and I asked him to take me back. He hesitated like he didn't want to, but he finally drove me back to campus. On the way, I noticed some folded paperwork in the center console too. It had a full name printed out on it that I had never heard before. Up until that point, he had only given me a first name and a different last name, but after that morning, he basically disappeared. His Instagram account vanished too, and the other accounts that he'd messaged me from were gone as well. About 2 years later, I got a notification that he had viewed a story that I'd posted on Snapchat, and when I checked his profile, he had posted the photo that he took of me in his car that first night, the exact same one. He must have known that I'd see it too, because we were still connected there at that time, and I didn't respond, and he never contacted me again. And I haven't seen him since. But after hearing about that assault case last year in the same county, I started thinking about all the small details again. The fake name, the empty house, the rifle thing, the random photo. Maybe it was just a really weird and disturbed guy and nothing more than that. But the whole situation still doesn't sit right with me, and I still have no idea who he actually was, and so I'm sort of contemplating whether or not I should go and talk to the authorities about this recent case. So this has been going on for about a month now, and honestly, it's gotten under my skin more than I expected. I keep thinking that maybe I'm just overreacting or something, but every time something else happens, it gets stranger. So I live in an apartment complex in Idaho with my girlfriend. Our schedules are pretty opposite. I work late shifts at a warehouse, so most nights she's home alone until around midnight when I get back. The first weird thing happened on a Tuesday night in late September last year. She texted me saying that someone had been knocking on our door for quite some time. Not like a quiet knock either. She said that it started around 8 p.m. and it kept happening every 20 to 30 minutes. The first time it happened, it was normal knocking, 3 taps. Second time, it sounded like somebody using the side of their fist. Third time, she said that it was straight up pounding, like whoever it was wanted the door opened immediately. She didn't answer, obviously. She just stayed quiet and watched the door from the couch. Our apartment doesn't have a peephole, so she couldn't see who it was. And after about an hour, it seemed to have stopped. When I got home, she was pretty shaken up. I walked the hallway and the stairwell, but nobody was around. The next morning, I ordered one of those door cameras, specifically the Ring Video doorbell, because I figured that if a person came back, at least we'd know who it was. About 5 days later, around 9 p.m., the camera alert goes off. I'm still at work, so she sends me the clip, and some guy is standing right in front of our door, not knocking and just standing there. He's looking directly into the camera like he knows that it's there as well, and then he does something really weird. He raises one finger to his mouth like he's thinking or telling someone to be quiet. Then he suddenly bends over, sort of forward, kind of hunching down so that the camera only sees the top of his head. He stays there like that for maybe a minute, then he straightens up and just walks away. That alone was enough to make both of us very uncomfortable, but it gets worse. A few nights after that, my girlfriend goes down to the building laundry's room, and it's in the basement, and it's usually empty late at night. She's switching clothes from the washer to the dryer when she notices someone else in the room, a guy standing against the wall near the vending machines. She said that she didn't recognize him at first and assumed that he'd lived in the building. She tried to ignore it and kept doing her laundry. Then the guy says really quietly, "Oh, there she is." That's it. Not "hey," not "excuse me," just that sentence. She said that the way that he said it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up as well, like he'd been expecting to see her. She didn't respond and just grabbed the laundry basket and came back upstairs. When she told that part to me, I immediately asked what he looked like. And same clothes, same build as the guy in the camera video. That's when it actually started to feel like a real problem as well. The next night, I walked down with her when she did laundry, and I stayed the entire time, but nobody showed up. And for about a week, nothing happened. Then last Friday morning, at around 10 a.m., the camera alert goes off again. Same guy. This time, he isn't even pretending to knock too. He's leaning against the doorframe like he's waiting for someone, 1 foot on the wall, arms folded. He stands there, maybe 90 seconds, just staring at the door, and then he walks off again. My girlfriend didn't open the door, obviously. She waited almost 2 hours before leaving the apartment, and when she finally did leave, she saw him again. He was coming in from the parking lot right as she was heading out. She said the timing was way too perfect to be coincidence, like he had just been outside watching the building all that time. He didn't say anything this time though, and just walked past her and into the stairwell. Since then, we've saved all the camera clips and reported it to the apartment manager. They said that they would keep an eye out, which honestly doesn't make me feel too much better. We still don't know who he is even. He's never knocked again since that last time, but every now and then the motion alert goes off and we both get this moment of dread before checking the camera. Nothing yet, thankfully, but that line in the laundry room still bothers me. There she is. Like, he already knew exactly who he was looking for. At the start of COVID, during the 2-week lockdown, my dad, very concerned, said, "Frank, please don't think that I'm crazy, but I swear that I saw 3 grey aliens walking across the street, and then they went into the woods." I asked him how tall. He said very skinny creatures, about 4 feet tall. 2 days later as well, and I'm not joking, a military person sky-dived into their community. I witnessed it while we were driving back into the neighborhood, and we were like, what the actual heck? White vans running in and out of the neighborhood non-stop. You would see them at least 20 to 30 times per day, which made me believe that something happened that was far beyond COVID. To add to all of this, about a month later, my dad randomly leaves the house while I'm visiting, says that he wants to go and be with God. He's completely at peace, acting totally normal, leaves the house and walks down the street. The cops pick him up though. The cops call me, and when I'm on the phone with the cop, he says, "Hang on real quick." Then I hear, "Oh no, oh no," then a loud gunshot. At this point, obviously I'm panicking, thinking that my dad was shot. A totally different cop gets on the phone. I hadn't talked to this guy before. Says, "Sorry, that was unrelated. Your dad is fine and we'll bring him home now." In that moment, I literally thought to myself, was the original cop that I talked to shot and replaced or something? Did he see one of those greys and had to shoot it? He was in complete panic with his voice, but the next cop on the phone was completely fine, as if nothing had happened. Anyway, that was weird, and Dad comes home with them and instead says that he wants to go and check himself into a hotel for a few days. So they offer to drive him to the hotel. Dad turns off his phone, won't let anybody come and visit him, has no communication with us during this time, says that he just wants to be alone. Eventually he comes back home after the few days like nothing happened whatsoever, and to this day says, "I don't want to talk about what happened that night." And I'm like, "Yeah, but it was weird. Like, can you explain what happened and why you felt that way?" And he's just like, "No, I don't want to get into that." Personally, I think that he saw something, or something serious happened, and he's concerned that if he says something that he'll be labeled insane. But what do you guys think about this? I legit got scared thinking that they replaced my dad or something. The grey alien thing was super weird too, and it was really weird to hear a loud gunshot on the phone and then suddenly I'm speaking to a different cop. I remember when the cops came by the house to drop him off as well, and their demeanor was just incredibly weird. I dare say, almost like they were not human. They just didn't act right. My fiance and I went for a 3-day trip to Gatlinburg, and we've spent our days in the mountains hiking and spending time in and around the national park. Tonight, at around midnight, trying to get all the time in the mountains that we can, we decided to take an hour drive from our hotel room up the mountain to an overview or lookout type of spot right on top of said mountain to see if we can catch an awesome look at the stars, because there's a lot of lights in Gatlinburg at night. Driving up there, neither of us noticed literally anything off, other than that the mountain and the winds are a little spooky at night. I'm from Florida, so it's just unfamiliar, I guess. But as soon as we got to where we were going and she and I got out of the car, I'm almost overwhelmed with just a vile, oppressive feeling outside with me. But not wanting to make the lady uncomfortable, I don't react too much just yet. The wind is absolutely roaring, and unfortunately, we couldn't see any stars due to cloud cover, so I tell her that I'm going to step to the side and pee, and then we can get back to the hotel room. Now, as soon as I get like 10 feet away, I get a very strange feeling of extreme vulnerability and detachment from everything around me, almost as though I'm miles away from the nearest person, though obviously I'm feet away from my fiancée. I turn around to walk back to the car, and that was when I heard something off to my right, and instinctively looked over to see something roughly human size go down to coyote size and kind of just hop over a rail from about 200 feet, maybe more, feet away. I quickly get back to the car and usher my fiancée in, still not trying to scare her, or at least show her that I'm scared. But she asked if I was alright, and my reaction was a dead giveaway. We jumped in and we sped off. Never in my life have I ever experienced anything like this, and never in my life have I ever really had a reason to be made uncomfortable of just being outside. But I truly believe that I saw something weird that night, in those woods, with us. One evening, I was out in Lacey, WA, to pick up a handgun that I had recently purchased for protection. Contrary to the pickup status both online and sent to my mail, the store didn't have it in stock yet and told me to come back in another week. I lived about an hour from Lacey at the time, and when I had gotten there, evening rush hour was just beginning to become unbearable. I didn't want to drive all the way back home just yet, as it would add an additional hour to my already long commute anyway. Side note too is that the car that I was driving belonged to my dad, and I was borrowing it until I had enough money saved up for a new car, after my beloved Honda had broken down the previous year. But I killed some time bumming around the store, and I purchased my firearm then decided to drive over to the nearest coffee shop. It was a newly built cabin-style cafe with a modern twist. The barista handed me my 16-ounce dirty chai, and I walked back out to my car. I then drove to a gas station around the corner, still trying to kill some time until traffic thinned out. The car didn't need any gas or anything, so I pulled into a parking spot right at the corner of the four-way street, the block that the gas station was on. I turned off the engine and stepped outside and lit up a smoke, leaning against the driver's side door so as to not stink up the interior. The weather was overcast and drizzly, but not overly cold. It was now dusk and most daylight had disappeared. The stoplights in the intersection were diffused by the late autumn mist, and I watched them flicker from green to yellow to red, and again as the traffic was orchestrated accordingly. Zoned out by the lights and being generally lost in thought while enjoying my coffee and smoke, I didn't notice the man walking toward me until he was already halfway across the street. He was white, average height, strawberry blonde, maybe in his mid-20s. He definitely hadn't changed his clothes in a good while and carried a backpack that I assumed to be full of the few belongings that he had. He didn't smell, but he looked raggedy and unkempt for sure. My immediate thought was that drugs were likely a part of his habitual lifestyle. I didn't want to jump to conclusions though, but I'm always cautious, having grown up in the suburbs of Seattle. The man finished crossing the street, awkwardly limping toward my car, maintaining eye contact and a winced grin. I locked my car out of caution, but remained outside smoking casually. Normally, I'm not a social person, but I don't go out of my way to be unpleasant either. He approached me and stood about 10 feet away when he said hello and asked if I had a light. I complied hesitantly, but saw no harm in meeting his simple request. Taking 2 steps forward, I lit his cigarette, which he was holding out toward me while approaching. He attempted to make small talk, weaving in hints that he had just gotten off the bus and still needed to get down the road another block. Somewhere in this poorly crafted sob story, he stopped himself mid-sentence like a bad actor and pretended to be struck by an epiphany. Hey, would you mind just dropping me off down the road? It's not very far. I apologized and said that I couldn't because it was my dad's car and not my own, and I didn't feel comfortable without my father's permission. I admit it was a stupid yet plausible excuse I came up with on the spot. Mr. Unkempt did not like my answer, and his smile immediately turned tense and flatlined. Clearly upset, he became more insistent. But it's just down the road, he whined. My leg is killing me, and it wouldn't even be far for you. I'll give you a cigarette. His persistence and sudden burst of hostility made my hair stand up. I firmly said, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you. It's my dad's car and he has set the rules. With 10 years of hospitality under my belt, I immediately offered him alternate logical ideas of what he could do to get where he needed to be. I even mentioned maybe someone in the gas station that we're outside of, maybe they could help him out, or call him a ride or something. Each word that I said made him increasingly irate, and he began curling his fingers into fists, not in a threatening way, but like a toddler about to scream bloody murder for not getting their way. He seemed to pause and size me up in a fleeting moment. I'm small and I'm not at all intimidating physically, so I told him that I hope he makes it home safe, quickly unlocked my car, jumped in and locked myself inside. When looking up from locking the car door, I saw him speed walking back across the street from the direction that he originally came from. No limp, no awkward walk whatsoever, no distress or pain showing even slightly, just a normal speed walk of a physically well person, a rageful person. I knew then that I had dodged a bullet, and I felt pretty dumb for hanging around the city after dark alone like that. At that point, I didn't care about traffic anymore, so I turned over my engine and hightailed it home in what ended up being an hour and 45-minute drive. But this time, the traffic was 100% worth the inconvenience. So, if you haven't heard it enough already, be careful who you give your attention to, especially when you're alone like this. Stay aware always and err on the side of caution, even when strangers seem harmless at first. A couple of months ago, my friend and I had a spontaneous idea to hike at sunset and eat Subway on the beach. We went to a place called Morse Mountain. We walked the trail for about an hour, and right when we got to the beach, it was just about pitch black outside. We hadn't thought to bring anything but some weed and some Subway. No flashlights or headlamps or hiking shoes or anything. Dumb idea, I know, but anyway, all was well for about the 2 hours that we laid on the beach smoking and eating and talking about life. It was beautiful hearing the waves and seeing a sky full of stars that night. I started getting tired, so I decided that we should probably head back. We gathered our stuff and started walking and both turned on our phone flashlights to guide our way. Not even a minute into the trail, we hear something moving in the forest to our left. I told my friend to stop and the sound suddenly stops too. Immediately, when we start walking again, the swishing is there and it's matching the exact pace that we are walking. So we stop again to test if this sound is really matching our pace. I was hoping that it was an animal just curious about who we were and would walk away, but the sound once again stops when we stop. My heart starts pounding because, well, there's no animal that I know of that is intelligent enough to match the exact pace and the exact steps that we are making. At least, not where we live. And my friend and I turned our flashlights to the left where the sound was coming from. And it was then that I make eye contact with something in the distance that was pale and had dead black eyes and looked like it was standing on its hind legs with terrible posture. My friend and I quickly turn our flashlight to point directly in front of us and say, "Please tell me that was an animal. Was it?" And my friend in a very monotone voice says, "No, we need to leave. Now, keep your eyes forward." For the rest of the hike, the trees and branches, they look like symbols and some even look like nooses. I felt like the forest was telling us to leave, or at least communicating some danger to us or something. Maybe it was just my imagination in the heat of the moment, I'm not sure, but I could have swore that I saw things. After about an hour, we finally made it back to the car, and I asked my friend if they noticed anything about the trees, and they also described the symbols. My friend called their mum on the drive home, and she said, "I'm just happy that you weren't in the Appalachians." The next morning, my friend calls me and says, "We're idiots. We were in the Appalachians last night." I haven't been able to stop thinking about what we saw that night. I also want to add that my friend and we didn't smoke much and are both stoners, so we don't chalk it up to the weed or anything. In any case, if you have any ideas as to what I experienced that night, then I would genuinely love to hear it. This happened about 6 years ago when I was 20. So, I came home after sleeping at my boyfriend's place. It was like 8 a.m. Super early because my boyfriend started his shift that early, and my parents were already gone like an hour earlier on their holiday. So, I was alone at home and I knew it. I came home and I directly went to my bedroom to continue my night, but before climbing the stairs, there's 2 floors, I saw the kitchen door or window was wide open. I was surprised by this, but I just thought that maybe my parents accidentally left it open. You have to know that my father is super paranoid though, and really there was no way that he would have forgot to close it, especially the windows before leaving the house for like 2 weeks. Plus, I was sleeping at my boyfriend's place, so there was definitely nobody home and he would have known that. Anyway, I was barely awake, so I just closed the door. I checked the kitchen and the living room just to be sure, and then I went to go to my room. There are 3 rooms on the 2nd floor, and I went to change in my room. Then I went to the bathroom, and I go back to my room. I closed the door to my room, and I didn't know why, but I never really did this normally. In any case, I was scrolling on my phone, and like 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps right behind my door. Somebody was definitely there the whole time while I was doing my life, just sort of vulnerably like this. I was terrified. My heart stopped. I couldn't move, and I just took the first thing in front of me to defend myself, my Babyliss. I stared at my door, waiting for the person to open up and kill me or worse. I was ready to jump out of the window and die if I saw the door opened. Minutes passed and I heard the person on the stairs. I don't know how long I stayed there, immobile, but eventually I called my boyfriend, and thankfully he came to the rescue. At first, I genuinely thought maybe I was going crazy because, I didn't see anything, and I couldn't believe that it really happened. But my boyfriend confirmed later that they had definitely forced the door or the windows in the kitchen open, so they were really there. They were silently waiting for me to sleep, I guess, so that they could get out of my house. I was home alone, feeling completely safe, but the whole time I wasn't. It was traumatic, and I could barely stay alone somewhere without freaking out to this day. I do live alone, and I'm constantly paranoid that someone is trying to break in. But the worst part is that they didn't take anything. My mum's MacBook and jewelry were there, my PS4 was there, my dad's gaming setup. Everything was so easy to take, but they didn't take a thing. I can't stop thinking that they were here for, well, another reason. You also have to know that at that time I was very active on Snapchat. I used to post every day, and I used to tell and put my story up every day as well. So, the 5K of unknown followers that I had on social media, they knew everything about me at this time, and I personally think that it must have been related. Since then, I have stopped my activities on Snapchat, and thankfully, nothing else has happened. When I was 12 years old, in 2007, I was home alone babysitting my two younger siblings while my parents, they were out at an event. It was summertime, so it stayed light out for a while into the evening. Just as it was starting to get dark though, I went into the kitchen to make a bowl of popcorn to watch a movie with my brother and sister. When I looked out the kitchen window, I saw that there was a car parked hiding in the tree line of our yard. For context, we lived in a fairly rural place, and we rarely had people out our direction unless they lived down our gravel road, and we knew our neighbor's car, so this was a junky beater and the license plates had been taped over as well. It was definitely not one of our neighbors. I was a kid who was pretty aware of my surroundings at the time, and I decided to step back from the big kitchen window and go into the dark entryway hall to get a better look. There was just a single man sitting in it, staring directly at the house with the lights off. Immediately upon noticing that, I locked the front and the back door. I told my little brother and sister calmly to play in their room and not to come out until I came and got them for the movie night. I then went back to the kitchen to get the phone to call my mother, but she didn't answer. I watched him through the curtains sit in the dark tree line and stare at the house for what felt like ages. Finally, somebody else drove down the road and their headlights reflected off the car. He started the engine, drove out of the trees, and seemed to book it down the gravel. I was still pretty nervous and tried calling my mother again, but again there was no answer. For the rest of the time, I just played with my siblings in their room with the door shut and the curtains pulled until my parents came home later that night. When I tried telling my parents what had happened, they were convinced that I was making it up and that I was just being a dramatic kid. But I swore up and down that I saw this car with blacked out plates in the tree line, and they just weren't interested at all. I know that I saw it, but really I'm the only one who did. Maybe it was just a random guy who didn't know that there were 3 young kids home alone hiding for some other reason, but still, I'm really glad that I locked all the doors that evening because, honestly, who knows what could have happened. To start this off, I need to give some context. I'm 23 and I currently live in New York City, but I have grandparents who live down in rural West Virginia. When I say rural, I mean the literal boonies. Their closest neighbors are over an hour away in a small town with a few houses and a Walmart. Last summer, my grandfather, who I just call Robert for privacy reasons, had surgery done on his hip. The majority of my family lives on the West Coast, and my grandmother, Muriel, is very old and wouldn't have been able to take care of Robert. Because I was the closest family member, I was the one that they asked to come down there and help out my grandfather. And, being the good grandson that I am, I agreed to come down there for 2 weeks while he recovered from his surgery. Fast forward a week, everything was going fine. All I really had to do was help my grandfather up and down the stairs and walk his dog, a blue heeler named Rocky. Normally, my grandfather would walk Rocky once in the morning and once at night through the woods behind their property, but because of the surgery, that responsibility had fallen onto me. This was the part that I hated about helping him because ever since I was a kid, I never really liked those woods behind the property. Whenever I'd go down there as a kid, me and my cousins would always get creeped out going into that forest. It always just felt off for some reason, but anyways, for the first week, walking Rocky in the forest at night was fine, even if it was a bit creepy. That was until one night, a week into my stay, I was walking him through the forest. It was around 8:30 and the sun was setting over the Appalachian Mountains. Everything was going normal, until I heard a strange whistle that sounded like it was only around 20 yards away. Both me and the dog stopped dead in our tracks and looked towards the direction the whistling was coming from. I shined my flashlight in that direction, but I didn't see anything, so I had just assumed that it was a bird. Looking back though, it definitely wasn't a bird. There's no nocturnal birds that chirp and whistle out there, and it sounded more musical than anything a bird could whistle anyway. But the dog was spooked. He wouldn't stop growling and staring at whatever was back there, and he kept trying to back up until whatever or whoever this thing was whistled again, to which the dog started barking and going absolutely crazy. At this point, I decided that I definitely didn't want to stay there, so I yanked on the dog's leash and we both bolted out of the woods and straight back home. When we got back, I told my grandparents what had happened. They both seemed spooked, and my grandmother immediately asked if I whistled back. I told her that I didn't, and she seemed relieved, but told me that I didn't hear anything and to just ignore it. I asked why, and she wouldn't tell me, and would instead just tell me that I didn't hear anything. I decided not to press it any further, and I just went to bed, terrified and wondering what she seemed to be so freaked out about. Now, the next morning she told me that instead of walking Rocky through the woods, I could just take him on laps around the house, and so that's what I started doing. Every night I would take Rocky for around 50 laps around the house before going back inside. On Friday, the third to last day that I would stay there, at night I was taking the dog for laps as usual, until I heard that same creepy whistle behind the attached garage this time, which was only around 10 yards from the house. This time, I immediately took the dog back inside and locked the doors. The rest of the night, I put my earbuds in and I ignored any more whistling like my grandmother told me to. To this day, I really still don't know what the whistling in the woods was all about. Some of my friends said that it was a skinwalker, but that's a Navajo thing, and there's almost no Navajo in West Virginia. My girlfriend, who stayed back in New York City, asked her Muslim parents who are from Yemen, and they said that whistling at night is a sign that a jinn is nearby. I don't know about any of that, and I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, it had my grandparents legitimately scared. I've heard of weird stuff happening in Appalachia, but this really is the first time that I've ever had a first-hand experience with it. So, that's why I'm here. Do any of you guys have any idea as to what this could have been? So I've lived in a number of houses, and just last night I saw it for the second time, and I have no idea what it is. Around 4 or 5 years ago, I lived in a house built in the 1920s to 1930s, and there was one night that I was sleeping in the basement that I woke up. I've always had difficulty sleeping at night, and consistently woke up between 1 and 4 in the morning. It was an issue that I had from like ages 8 to 16. In any case, I woke up and there was this black mist in the corner of my room. Weirdly too, I wasn't scared, but it just felt like it was there. It was thick enough that I couldn't see through it, but after a moment I shined a flashlight on it with my phone, then turned the light off and it was gone. Fast forward to now, and I just got back home from a 12-day trip. My family moved, so our current home was constructed in the past 10 years. I woke up in the middle of the night. I'm 20 now, so it's been years since I've done that, and looked to my left, and there was a black mist right beside my bed, probably around 4 to 5 feet in height. Again, I wasn't scared, but I just turned back over and said, "I'm safe," and something else that I can't really recall right now, but then I just fell back to sleep. This experience has been interesting for me too, and I wonder what the apparition could be, if it's an apparition at all. My response was unnormal as well, right? I mean, I've been a bit stressed lately, but I also feel revitalized since going to see some family on vacation. In any case, if you've got any ideas as to what this was, then please do share, and if you can provide any help with this, then I would love to hear from you. When we were kids, my brother and I slept in the same room in a bunk bed. I was always a heavy guy, so I'd sleep on the bottom and he slept up top. We both remember this night to this day, which obviously could just be because we've talked about it so many times over the years and have tricked our brains into treating it as fact, but, still. Anyway, we're both asleep, and at the foot of our bed is a window. There's a street light across the road, so there was literally always some light coming through the curtains. We always sleep with our heads towards the other way, so that window would be at our feet. I'm not entirely sure what woke me up, but when I did, I just had that overwhelming feeling of somebody watching me. I wake up and open my eyes, and at the foot of my bed is a literal shadow person. And I mean, you could very clearly see the personage's outline with the lit up curtain behind him. Like, absolutely pitch black against a white lit up cloth curtain. He was definitely wearing a hat, but like just a hat, like a baseball sort of trucker-shaped hat. He was also two-hand holding what looked like a firefighter's wood-cutting axe. It was pretty long, I recall, but I just kind of sat there for a good minute, completely frozen in fear. He didn't move at all that I can remember, but after a minute or two, in the deepest and most gruff voice that I've ever heard, he just says, "One day." At that, I flipped and hid under the covers because, as a child, I couldn't think of anything else that I could do. After another minute passed, I just hear my brother's shivering voice say, "John, did you see that too?" I answered that I had, and we just kind of laid there in silence, and eventually we both drifted off back to sleep, I guess. But we both swear that we remember it like 20 years later. I'm also wondering if anybody else has heard of an experience or something similar to this, as we have no idea what it was that we saw and haven't seen anyone say that they've experienced something like this. Theories we've tossed around go from just a straight-up demon or evil spirit to a literal home intruder to a Grim Reaper type thing. That last one always seemed to make sense to me because of what it said to us, but it never did show up again for either of us. Our mum took over that room a while after for a few years, then I took it for a few, and now my brother still lives back at home and it's his room. So we've all had ample time with nothing happening, which is a bit weird, right? So when I was in kindergarten or first grade, about 22 to 23 years ago, I saw an apparition that seems, very cliche. An old woman in a white dress, no lips with snarling teeth, black eyes, floating and no visible feet. At first, I heard this woman's footsteps coming down the hallway on the hardwood floor. Then I saw her come to the end of the hallway, my room on the right, my mum's on the left. This woman stopped at the end of the hallway and slowly looked back and forth between the rooms, her head oscillating like a fan, slow but consistent. She then turned around and walked away slowly, footsteps fading into nothing. At this time, I shared a room with my brother, 4 years older than me, who was also awake and saw the woman too. I called his name quietly and he said, "Shut up, I see her too, put your blanket over your head." I've asked him multiple times throughout our lives about this happening and he has zero recollection of it. So I assumed in the end that it was just an extremely vivid dream that was stuck with me for my whole life. I never brought this story up with anybody else, until recently. You see, my mother and I were talking about some paranormal experiences that we'd had throughout our lives. I said something about the Carmel house, but never went into detail, and she proceeded to explain to me the exact same woman that I saw wearing a white dress at the end of the hallway, looking back and forth between our rooms. Honestly, I felt sick. This apparition was no longer a vivid dream. I mean, that actually happened. She was real. She was there and she was looking at me. But how many times did she actually do that while I was asleep and I never saw her? I have a lot of questions that really I don't have answers to, but I will say that without a question, I am a believer now. Several years ago, I was living in College Station, Texas. The job market there is really rough for anyone outside of academia, but I landed a job as a sales consultant for a digital marketing company, or at least that's what I was told. After I started, I found out my job would really be in door-to-door sales, trying to sell digital marketing packages and, well, phone book ads to small businesses. The company was terrible, the managers were pure evil, and the product was awful. I was looking for a new job, but I needed a paycheck. Now one day, they sprang something on us. From now on, we would only spend half of the year in College Station. The other half we would be living in a hotel in Abilene, selling phone book ads there. My wife was so understanding about this. I'd be able to come back home on the weekends, and I had a few promising leads for work too. I figured that I'd only need to spend a month or so there. Now, the first time I'm heading out, I actually quite enjoy the view on the trip. Lots of small towns and interesting landscapes. But even better, I look down at my phone as I'm partway through my trip, and I'm making way better time than expected. Like way better, an hour ahead of schedule. In fact, I was certain that I had checked my phone before, and that hadn't been the case. But the clock on the dash confirmed it, and that was when I was just pulling through a town called Rising Star. I'm a big horror and occult fan, and immediately made a mental connection to Lucifer, since it means morning star, and gave myself a bit of a chuckle. It was a small town, but despite it being broad daylight, I was surprised to see, well, really no one. I mean, I didn't see a single person. I slowed down, looking into the windows, but nothing. It was summer, and I mean, there weren't even any kids around playing in their yards or anything. I saw parked cars, but no one driving or sitting in one. That's when I passed what I seem to recall being an old brick drugstore. There on the side of the building was a mural of a man with a bunch of snakes dangling from his mouth. It really creeped me out, especially with my previous Lucifer connection. A part of me was tempted to stop somewhere, just to see if I could find a human being at some point. But that mural, something about it changed my mind. And as soon as I left that town, I looked at my phone and my car's clock again. They were both an hour ahead of where they had been before. I did research later, and there was an innocent explanation about the mural involving a local celebrity who participated in a lot of rattlesnake roundups and I think had a Guinness record for doing something like this. I can look up his name again later if anybody's curious, but still, that time fluctuation and the eerie absence of people, something about it just didn't feel right, and it still haunts me. I also regularly have nightmares about that place to this day, which is strange. In any case, I took a different route from then on and soon found a new job as well, but I always joke with my friends that I have a feeling that I'll be back there one day, and I won't come back. Really though, it's only half a joke, I suppose, because that's always what happens in my nightmares. When I was 19, about 20-ish years ago now, I was renting a flat and lived alone. On the first night there, I was laying in bed trying to sleep when all of a sudden I heard loud footsteps running up my hallway and stopping just outside of my bedroom door. Instantly I sat up, expecting the door to swing open, but then there was silence and nothing else happened as I sat there. A few nights later, I was trying to sleep and then I could hear someone breathing. It sounded like they were standing to the side of the bed near my head, but I couldn't see anyone there. After that, every few nights, I would hear the breathing right behind me as well, regardless of what room I was in, at various times during the day, but mostly at night. What really freaked me out though and confirmed things was that one time I had a friend staying over. We were watching TV in the living room and the breathing started. He looked at me and goes, "Is that you breathing?" And the only thing that I could think to answer was, "No, that just happens sometimes." I only stayed there until my 6-month lease ran out because I was way too freaked out and tried to sleep at friends' houses as much as I could. The day that I was moving out, I noticed footprints on the ceiling of all places. The ceiling was also way too high up for anyone to be able to put their bare feet on it. It was a freaky place to live, and I was glad to leave it behind. This story is from about 5 years ago when I worked security for a large office or furniture manufacturer in Michigan. I did mainly foot and vehicle patrols of primarily the 3 factory plants, but occasionally the corporate office buildings and an older home that the company bought and refurbished. The company would use the home for tours for the public, and they would use it for some wow factor for potential buyers they flew in to make a sale. For more reference, this home was designed by a famous architect and is known for its style and large bay windows and painted glass. The home, it was built in the early 1900s, and as far as I'm aware, no one ever died in the home or anything like that. Now, I worked midnight shifts, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and we had a bit of a storm rolling in the night of my shift. At about 1:30 a.m., the control operator received a fire alarm fault from the fire panel at the home, and when compared to prior alarms that night and the weather that we were experiencing, it was presumed that the power had gone out and, when it came back on, set off the fire alarm fault. So, I was dispatched as a precaution to ensure everything was okay and to reset the fire alarm panel. I got to the home at around 1:45 in the morning and made my way into the home. I had been there a handful of other times, and fellow security guards had told me about weird occurrences that had happened around the house over the years. The main story was about them seeing the light on upstairs and a black silhouette of a figure standing in the window just watching them. There were also stories from the tour guides of the home that stated that the dolls in the nursery would be found in different locations from when they last saw them when nobody else was entering that room. Anyways, I made my way to the basement, which is where the fire alarm panel was located. I reset the panel and attempted to radio to the control operator to see if the fault had reset. At this time it was around 2 a.m. and my radio was completely just refusing to operate. It was making weird noises when I tried to key it up and kept losing signal. I didn't think too much of it and pulled my phone out and called them instead. I was able to establish a phone call, but it kept cutting out and had a lot of feedback until the call finally dropped and my phone went into SOS. In any case, I decided to do a bit of a walkthrough of the house since I was already there and wanted to kill some time anyway. I went back upstairs, walked through the kitchen, into the dining room and into the living room. The large windows noted earlier are primarily in the living room. The lights were old in the home and they were operated by buttons on the walls and not switches, but I elected to just use my flashlight instead. I walked into the living room and did a quick once-over of the room with my flashlight, and for a split second, in the reflection of the bay window, I could have sworn that I saw an old man seated in the chair, sitting less than 5 feet away from me. He was staring at me through the reflection with an eerily emotionless face. I sort of doubled back while questioning what I just saw, but the image was now burned into my mind. When I looked back there was nothing. I immediately felt uneasy though, and I paused momentarily, but elected to continue my walkthrough of the home. The staircase was beside the living room and went up to a landing, maybe about 10 feet long, which proceeded to another staircase to the second floor. I proceeded up the stairs and stepped into the landing, and I cannot describe the feeling that rushed over me into words. It was like something out of the movies. All of the hair on my body stood up and my face went cold as all the blood just rushed away and I had an immediate sense of danger. Needless to say, I sprinted out of that home to my patrol vehicle and sped off without looking back. They eventually pulled the video footage of me sprinting out of the house, and it was a bit of a joke for a while, but I know what I saw, and I know what I felt. Sometimes I wonder if the people working there now are told of my weird and interesting story. I wonder if any of them ever had their own encounters or experiences. Really though, who knows? I personally really don't have much experience with the supernatural. However, my late best friend, who passed away over 20 years ago when we were 19, once told me about the following encounter that she had, and I would like to see if anybody else has had any similar experiences or sightings to this. So, she told me that when she was 7 or 8, she and her dad were napping on a big pallet after watching a movie in their living room. It was the middle of the day on a weekend. Their living room, in which her dad still lives, has big glass panes on one wall overlooking the back patio. The house sits on some significant acreage in the brushy woods of central Texas. No neighbors within at least half a mile, likely more. But my friend said that she woke up from a nap to see a woman standing right outside the big window, covered in rags, possibly pelts even, with leaves and twigs in her hair. I think she described her as old, but I can't remember with absolute certainty. As my friend looked at her though, the woman started opening her mouth, and apparently it just kept getting wider and wider, well beyond normal human capabilities. She shook her dad awake and screamed for him to look out at the window, and when they both looked, she was gone. She swore up and down that it wasn't a dream though. Her dad didn't believe her, of course, but I did, and I still do. She was my soul sister, and I knew when she was being truthful. So, does anyone have any ideas? I've looked into Baba Yaga and various forest hags, etc., but the widening mouth never seems to be a distinct feature of anything I've come across over the years. So, is there anything else like this that sounds familiar? I cannot pinpoint exactly when I first began to experience this. Best that I can remember is I was around the age of 10 to 11, although it's possible the occurrences began a little earlier than this. However, I vividly remember being scared of my bedroom window once it got dark outside because of what I regularly saw. On numerous occasions, I would see the same face in the bottom left-hand corner on the outside of the window, just looking in at me. For context, my bedroom at the time was on the second floor of the house, so no possibility this was just somebody walking by the window, unless they were like over 15 feet tall, that is. Despite this occurring over 20 years ago now, for context I'm in my mid-30s, I can still recall that face too. It was distinctly male, with thin unkempt hair, the skin pulled in as though the figure was starved. If I had to age the figure, my best guess would be in its 30s, maybe 40s. Oddly though, the one detail I can't remember are the eyes. The reason that I can remember this much detail though is because it was always the same face, always in the same position. Seeing this figure always gave me a sense of dread, and I would do whatever I could to pretend that it wasn't there watching me. I would suddenly glue my eyes to my TV or pick up a book and start reading, hoping that it would leave me alone. I didn't have curtains in my bedroom, so I didn't have that as an option back then, and whenever I called my parents to check, they never saw anything, and simply passed it off as my mind playing tricks on me. That dread that I felt whenever I saw the figure would stay with me for the rest of the night until I eventually managed to fall asleep. When I did sleep, I would have these really upsetting dreams, almost every night. Dreams of being chased and, in a lot of cases, even being killed. I remember speaking to my therapist about a reoccurring dream that I would have where I was chased and thrown off a bridge that I had to cross on my walk to school with, but they didn't read much into it. To this day, in fact, I have issues sleeping. My partner has mentioned several times that I have a tendency to whimper in my sleep as if frightened. I can never sleep through a full night either, waking up at least 2 or 3 times for no reason. I also still try to avoid going past windows at night, unless the windows are drawn first, and even then I still feel slightly uneasy. And it wasn't just seeing the figure in the window either. There would be occasions I would go and turn on the light in my room, but it just wouldn't work. It would turn on and the bulb would do something, but the light was just very dim. Just a dark orange glow, barely lighting anything up. The first time this happened, I instinctively knew something was wrong, and every subsequent time instilled that same anxiety. The bit that I never got to understand was why it happened. Every time it did, I would quickly turn the light back off and call my parents. They would come up and turn the light on for me, and everything worked fine. For some unexplainable reason, it was only ever when I was alone that the light played up like this. Just as it was only ever when I was alone that I would see the figure in the window, as if it was trying to mess with my mind or just didn't want to make its presence known to anyone else. After several years of this, my sister started to become frightened of a grey figure stalking my father around the house, which only she could ever see. On one occasion, she started screaming and crying for apparently no reason. When we managed to calm her down enough to speak, she told us that she saw the figure reaching out trying to stab my father in the back. It was at this point that I definitely knew that something wasn't right and confided in the school chaplain. We weren't a religious family in any sense, but I attended a Catholic high school, and at this point, I didn't really know who else to turn to. The school chaplain came over to the house and blessed the premises. Whilst it wasn't a full exorcism or anything, he made sure to bless every room, anointing the doorways with holy water. And whatever it was that we experienced in all those strange occurrences, it all just stopped following the visit from the chaplain that day. We moved house roughly 18 months after that. I've lived in several houses since then and have never experienced the figure again, but as mentioned, I'm still anxious about going near windows at night, so its effects upon me are still very real. Whatever it was I did experience, what my family experienced, I can't say for sure. Perhaps a ghost or some sort of malevolent entity, I really have no idea, but I wanted to share my experience nonetheless and see what you guys think. "25+ years ago, I was friends with a married couple that lived in a raised ranch on the mountain in a modestly populated area. Their door was always open, and I was a frequent visitor. Since the first time that I was at that house, I always felt uneasy, like there was some type of a presence there quietly observing. Quick backstory too is that the land the house was built on was Native American territory back in the day, and I later came to learn and experience many phenomena, but I'll focus on this one story. So, I was to meet my friends at the house for an evening out. But they were both working and probably not home yet, but I decided to wait for them there. I drove there and took the corner on their street. Pitch black, not unusual, no street lights. As I near the house, I notice all the lights are on, inside, outside, post light, and I think that they must be home. Chills run through me though, and I decide to pull into the driveway because neither of their cars are there. I sat in the driveway for a minute, looking around, listening, with a heavy type of feeling coming over me, yet decided to turn my car off and go in anyway. I get to the front door, gently turn the knob, and slowly open their door. Peeking inside, I see nothing and hear nothing, but all of the lights are still on. I hesitated to go any further. I call out, "Hello," still standing in the doorway, looking up the stairs, and in one moment, all the lights suddenly went out, including the ones outside. I immediately froze in fear. Total darkness and total silence. My arm felt heavy shutting the door and attempting to get back to my car while guided by moonlight. It was weird because it was as if weights were on my ankles and I struggled to make it inside of my car. My hands were shaking so bad that I barely was able to get the key in the ignition. I felt tightness in my chest and I was shaking and I couldn't breathe. Just a total feeling of hopeless dread engulfed me. I parked on the road by the mailbox, sat there staring at the house in darkness trying to compose myself for I don't even know how long. Eventually though, the wife pulled up and I put the window down. "You could have gone in, you know," she says before looking at my face and asking what was wrong. I just pointed at her house. She parked in the driveway and she walked back to my car while her husband was pulling in. He comes down and asks why we're outside, and I told them that I'll wait here while they get ready. The wife then asks, though, something happened, didn't it? I nodded yes to this, still shaking. The wife looked at the husband and says, it's starting up again. I was close friends with them for many years, even staying there temporarily, and their house, let's just say that it had quite the history. In 1999, we lived in a badly possessed or haunted house for about 8 years in Beaver Creek, Oregon, and genuinely, I really don't like talking about it. It's honestly very cliche horror, story, or textbook sort of stuff, and people think that I'm just bullspitting, so I prefer to just keep it simple. But literally, the house was at a deal with weirdly boarded up rooms. The family had been sleeping in just one area together. The whole affair was an awakening and a sort of you get what you pay for sometimes, go with your gut type lesson. It all started pretty benign though. We immediately took down all the boards to open the rooms and couldn't figure out their purposes. The rooms were bare but fine. We were doing construction, which is pretty typical, right? The house wasn't terribly old, like maybe 1950s. But then there was just like small stuff. One of the first instances I remember is we had the molding stacked on the right side of the hall, labeled to be put back up, and at about 2 a.m. we could hear it sort of clanking. When we checked, it had been rolled and moved to the left. We thought that maybe we misremembered the direction, but the next night, it moved back. My husband and I were suddenly always arguing for no good reason, and we'd have dread about coming home without knowing why. Also instant relief to leave though. It progressed from there over months to full on getting scratched, hit, terrorized for me. I'll leave some personal details out here, but it was a rough couple of years. Eventually it was bad enough that my husband had his guns missing when he'd been cleaning them only to have them reappear loaded and pointed at him off the back of the couch. It had finally decided messing with him would be fun as well. It previously really just picked on me, and he honestly considered that I was having a mental health crisis, but he kept hearing me weeping at night when I wasn't. We had called multiple churches, none of them would help. I was raised Catholic, and that was especially disappointing, but not surprising, I suppose. The Pentecostal church did eventually try to help us, and they didn't like what they found. I don't like the labels, but I'm sure you can guess what they called it, and said that they'd need the whole congregation to get rid of it, wanted me to get baptized to move forward and all that. Long story short, they still couldn't get rid of it, and it just came back, more ticked off than ever it seemed. We had to learn to just not feed it any fear or stress or anger, and we had to cleanse every couple of days for the rest of the years that we lived there. I also had a crash course in occult stuff to deal with it myself because it was pretty obvious that there was no easy access to help. I did manage it at home much better from then on though, and I took control of my own space. But we had such bad luck too those whole 8 years that we were there. My husband is a vet and he was struggling to get his disability to 100%, even though he was forced out on medical because he couldn't work like he used to. Eventually that house caused us bankruptcy and we let the bank take it, willingly too, to get out. I just couldn't bring myself to sell it to someone after, well, all of that. When we moved, I was really afraid too that it was going to follow us. My husband went back up one last time to grab some furniture and stuff that we'd left. The power had been turned off with the electric company the week before, and when he came in, all the lights were on, the AC was blowing, water was running in the faucet. He just backed out and called me. "You mind if we just leave the rest?" is what he said. I didn't make him go back in, so in the end we left the sofa set and a bunch of other stuff behind. I swear though that the first night in the new house, I saw what some would call an angel. I'm not a Christian, so I just say light, and felt such peace and relief, a strong knowing that it was done and we wouldn't be followed. I couldn't remember ever sleeping so well up until that time as well. And genuinely, I loved that rental. Now, here's the thing. We found out a bunch of weird stuff after this as well. The last 3 people who had owned it before us had also filed bankruptcy, and they had been foreclosed on as well, which I found interesting. Also, once you've lived with the paranormal like that, you're more open whether you'd like to be or not, so there's always something knocking around our homes now. I no longer fear it. I'm kind of numb to it, to be honest. It's really just normal for us, but never again has it been something like that either. I had a healer for a while, and she called it a forced kundalini from overexposure to a strong entity, but again, I don't know about any of that, and I'm just glad that we're out of there and we never had to go back. When I was 13 or 14, I had a nightmare that woke me up. At the time, I slept on the bottom bunk bed that I shared with my brother. Feeling relieved that it was just a dream, I opened my eyes a little bit more and see a 6-foot-tall, thin silhouette standing next to my bed. Squinting, I looked at its face, and it looked like my older brother smiling at me. I wondered what on earth he was doing in my room in the middle of the night like this. He slept in the room across the hall. But then I saw my brother's face morph into an androgynous stranger with long blonde hair and a menacing smile. It extended its hands, and in one of its hands, I saw an axe with a half-moon blade. The figure began to raise the axe above its head, both hands on the hilt, ready to strike, and it jumped toward me at a speed probably half the speed of what you'd expect. I shouted as loudly as I could while yanking my covers over my face and turning away from the figure. My scream woke up my whole family, and I can't prove that it was a dream within a dream, but honestly, it felt real to me. I also experienced strange phenomena in that room, like an RC car turning its wheels randomly in the quiet hours of the early morning. Its only controller, though, was resting on my dresser, empty of batteries. My question for all of you guys, though, is, was this a mimic? And do mimics scare young kids like this? I mean, I don't think it was sleep paralysis because I was awake and moving. I don't think it was a dream because I felt like I was awake. So, what could this be, and what other being could this have been? When I was in elementary school, I was also attending music school. That morning, I was heading towards the bus stop where I waited for the bus every day. I remember that it was raining that morning, everything was still wet, and I was carrying my umbrella folded in my hand. Now, there was a place to sit at the bus stop, so I sat down, put my umbrella between my legs, and since it was the time without mobile phones, I was just looking at the ground. Occasionally, I would look up towards the street to see if my bus was coming. I looked up, glanced to the left, and saw a mailman with a big, heavy bag, holding an umbrella with a wooden handle shaped like a duck's head. I followed him with my eyes and focused on that umbrella. As he passed by me, I saw him from behind and noticed that his pant legs were muddy and wet from the rain. I didn't pay too much attention though, and I looked down for about another 10 seconds. When I looked up again, I looked to the left, and that was when I saw the same mailman coming towards me, but it was again, with the same bag and the same umbrella, with a wooden handle shaped like a duck's head. At that moment, I was sort of startled. The bus arrived. I got on the bus through the front door and watched the mailman until he turned into a yard. And to this day, I really still don't understand what the heck happened there and how it was even possible to see the same person twice within about 10 seconds coming from the same direction. Before I begin, I should probably establish some background. This happened during my senior year of high school, so about 6 or so years ago. I've always struggled and suffered with sleeping issues, insomnia, nightmares, lucid dreams, and even some sleep paralysis. These things run throughout my family quite frequently, in fact. Now, due to my negative association with my own bed and by extension my bedroom as a whole, I would often sleep on a spare mattress in the middle of the living room. This night was no different, until I would feel myself slowly slipping into consciousness, but only due to an unusual feeling. That being my limp body being gently and slowly lifted up towards the ceiling. I distinctly recall the feeling of my long hair dangling below me too. As I floated there above my bed, I would feel this overwhelming sense of danger, doom, and plain evilness. My heart was beating intensely and my mind was racing, but I couldn't move. I tried to scream and talk, but I couldn't get anything out. It felt like an eternity until some noise from the apartment would force whatever was going on to finally release me. I would feel myself hit my mattress before pouncing up petrified. The time was 3-something in the morning, and it took me a couple of hours just to calm down. I didn't sleep that night, and for a week after that, I slept with the lights on too. What do you guys think actually happened though? Personally, I don't think it was something normal like sleep paralysis or whatever. I mean, I hit the mattress quite hard, and I remember even seeing some things moved around that just didn't make sense unless I actually fell from that height. So I work in a medical office, and my co-worker said that she came in one morning to open up, but when she got there, the door was already unlocked. All of the lights were on, the radio was on. In fact, it looked like somebody had already opened. Yet the building appeared empty. No cars in the parking lot either. Thing is, she and I were the only ones with a key, and our boss was out of town at the time. So, who opened that morning? It was around 4 a.m, whoever it was, but we all closed the office together the day before like usual. It was usually 3 of us that collaboratively did it, which we all remembered doing, so it's not that we left everything on and the door unlocked or anything. Scared and shaky, she said that she didn't know what else to do but to walk in and timidly go, "Hello." When she told me the story, I was like, "You didn't, did you?" After that, we had a running joke about how she would be the first to die in a horror movie. She would bring it up sometimes and we would laugh about it. On another occasion, my co-worker, the one who walked in and shakily went hello, said that she would be there by herself in the morning hours and feel someone walk behind her as she had her back turned. Like, you know how the air moves when somebody walks past you real close? She genuinely thought that somebody had come in, but when she turned around, obviously nobody was there. When she left later and a new girl took her place, the new girl reported the same thing happening from time to time too. On other occasions, I used to come in on the weekends to use our gym. The first time I did this, I saw a dark, shadowy head peek out at me from the corner of the hallway, then sort of dart back. It was as if someone was there and I had surprised or scared them maybe. I knew that it was our ghost at that point, so I would say, "Hey, it's just me," when I arrived, so they didn't freak out. It happened the first few times and then eventually it stopped. I guess after it got used to me arriving on Sunday mornings. I was there by myself on a Sunday too when I saw a tall man standing in the gym as I passed the hallway. He was looking at me. He seemed different than the hallway peeking ghost who was shorter and not as clear, but I sort of did a double take, but when I went back to check the gym, nobody was there. Our new Filipino PT saw the same tall man standing in the back office area, as in the section where our desks and computers were, and went back there quickly because he thought that it was a patient that needed something, but obviously there was no one. He came out and asked if a patient had just gone into the back office. We said no, and the secretary got really scared, and the new PT brushed it off, saying that it must have just been a spirit. They see those all the time in the Philippines apparently, and it's allegedly nothing to worry about. That certainly didn't help us though, and made all of us really feel a bit more unsettled, I guess. In any case, I was closing up one day and I was the last person to leave. I had to stay late to finish paperwork, and the activity always ramped up past 5 p.m. if there was anybody still in the building, or sometimes on weekends too when we weren't supposed to be there. I heard an elderly man say, "Help me," as if he were right beside me, and I knew that nobody was there. But I went around to every room to make sure that there wasn't a patient still hanging out anyway, and confirmed that I was the only one there. On another occasion, I was the last person in the building again. A patient needed to get his car towed out of the parking lot, and the tow truck was blocking my car, so I couldn't get out that day. I opted to just wait inside for them to finish when all of a sudden I heard dishes crashing in the kitchen. We had this tiny kitchen or laundry room area at work, and it was as if someone was violently throwing them. That day, I didn't even bother checking it out because I knew what it was. Instead, I decided to just get out of there as quickly as I could and to just wait outside. Personally, I think the ghosts, or whatever they were, just didn't like it when we were invading their personal time. After office hours seemed to be the worst. The incidences were less frequent during the middle of the day or work week, unless we just noticed them less perhaps. These are only my own accounts, but my co-workers had other things happen to them too, and I didn't get all of their stories. One minor one though was that the secretary said that she was working late at night with our billing lady to set something up on the computer, and the radio turned on by itself. It was all static, which it was never like that, before it started flipping through channels. She got really scared by that, and in the end they just left. Anyway, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask about pretty much anything, but I don't work there anymore, and to be honest, I'm actually grateful for that. Not long ago, my mum and I were talking about ghosts and scary stuff, since the house she has now is also haunted, and she told me a very frightening story. So that day, she needed to do the laundry. For that, you needed to go downstairs in the basement. She got downstairs, and while on her way down, she started to feel anxious or watched, a little bit scared. You know that weird sort of bad feeling that tells yourself that you should not stay there? That's what she had. Like I said though, she needed to do the laundry, so that's what she did. So there she was, putting the clothes in the washing machine. This feeling was still there and was growing. She tried to not give it attention and to just keep doing what she was doing, but the sensation of being watched was now more menacing than before, so it was becoming harder and harder for her to just ignore it. And then, while she was still putting the clothes in the washing machine, she heard something growl. A low, long, menacing growl, but it was coming from far from her. My courageous mother decided to stay there, just going faster because now she truly was scared, which is understandable. A couple of seconds later, she heard it again, a bit closer to her this time, and a lot more menacing. She finally started that washing machine, but now she needed to take the clean clothes and bring them upstairs. While she was taking them to transfer them into a basket, she heard it again, and it was closer. So close that she felt its breath this time caressing her neck. In panic, she finally decided to just get upstairs, getting out of the basement. Not even after she got like the third step though, she felt something grabbing her foot. Not exactly, but you know what I mean perhaps. She almost fell at the hold, and again she heard this growl. Luckily she didn't fall, so she kept going faster and scared now. Then, not even at the halfway point, she suddenly lost her breath. She described it like someone was strangling her, just without the feeling of hands around her neck. She also says that she felt like a hold on her, making it harder for her to get up the stairs. It was like somebody was pushing her, forcing her to get back into the basement. She fell at that all of a sudden, and without any air, she literally needed to crawl up the stairs. Plus, she was pregnant at the time, so just imagine how much harder it was to crawl and get out of this situation. She finally reached the door though, and she said that as soon as she passed that door and closed it, her breath came back immediately and she was no longer feeling this weird feeling and this sensation of being watched. Now, she felt safe. Now, I have slept in that basement for quite some time, and I have never felt or experienced anything like this. I really don't know why, but maybe since she's religious, something bad tried to do something to her or hurt her or something. If somebody has an explanation or questions, then it would be great to read it and to reach out, and I would be glad to try and answer what I can. I can also ask her for some more stories if you'd like, as she's experienced a lot of paranormal stuff. Maybe not as scary as that one, but they are for sure still pretty creepy. Anyway, thanks for listening and, well, wish me luck in this basement. The following took place in approximately 1990 in a Southern California medical school morgue. I will relate things in detail as I can clearly still remember them as if it was yesterday. So, the entrance to the main morgue office and laboratory is housed behind a solid, secure pair of double doors. These doors are often left open during work hours, but if nobody is in the office, they are secured. As soon as you step through the threshold in front of you, about a yard away is a big blue shower curtain that conceals the room behind it. To the right is the office area that is somewhat cramped with 3 large desks and 1 huge filing cabinet. The extremely basic files of each case, their ID number and death certificate, are initially kept in the file drawers until after the case has been used or moved on to its next location. To the left is a large storage area that houses large freezers for bodies, as well as numerous shelves with specimens and supplies. As cliché as it may sound, the day of my sighting started out like any other. I was the only one working on 3 separate cases that were all situated on their respective gurneys, and also in their own level of the embalming process. I had been working on the cases for maybe about 3 hours, without interruption from any of my co-workers. I think it's safe to say that I was very absorbed in my work on that particular day. It was getting close to lunch, however, so I decided to wash up and head to the office to take my lunch. As I passed by the door to the room that held the 3 large vertical refrigerators and the row upon row of already embalmed bodies, I looked to my right and clearly saw a full-sized apparition. I froze in my footsteps, like a character in a cartoon, and looked to my right further to see an older man standing in front of the closest vertical refrigerator. It was simply standing there. I could see through him, but at the same time clearly identify it as a person. As I stood there and looked for what seemed like minutes, it was probably only seconds though, the apparition turned and looked at me, and simply faded away and disappeared, almost like cigarette smoke dissipates into its environment. I continued to look in that direction, dumbfounded by what I had just seen. It was not scary in the least, but almost comforting, I guess, as if it was a completely natural, everyday occurrence. I merely went into the office and saw my co-worker William and exclaimed, "You won't believe what I just saw." He was completely unfazed though and looked at me and said, "You saw a ghost." I was more taken aback by his knowing what I had seen than what I had truly seen, to be honest. He went on to tell me that he had seen them quite often and enjoys the interaction when it happens. When we told our co-worker Joe what I saw, they were completely taken aback, scared and frantic. I tried to explain the visit as more of a comforting interaction than one like, think of a typical Hollywood haunting or whatever. That offered little comfort though, and the rest of the day it was rather off-kilter, I guess. One of the other employees that works for the morgue office, in a paperwork capacity exclusively, was Lola. She worked way down the hall, away from the actual work facilities. She was basically responsible for processing every piece of paper that needed to be dealt with through our office, that is. She was a petite, insightful lady who believed strongly in spirited events that involve interactions with the deceased. She would often attend seance-like events with friends and has reported successful contacts. She had plans to attend one of her spiritual meetings. The following day, she would bring it up to the group in attendance, and we all kind of thought that that was kind of neat, but really just shrugged it off and didn't think of her involvement in the situation again. That was until 3 days later when she came to speak to us about what she had come across. Apparently, her group leader during this seance-like meeting reached out inquiring as to the desire of the apparition that appeared before me. The group leader received the sense that The apparition was just somewhat confused and didn't quite know where to go. This theme continued during the meeting, with the apparition just being uncomfortable and lacking direction. The other extremely noteworthy feeling, though, the group leader came across was the letter W constantly appearing before her, apparently. It was as if the whole meeting and the interaction with the apparition revolved around the level of confusion in the letter W over and over again. Everyone's curiosity was spiked by what Lola had to say, though. Me especially. We all then walked over to where I saw the apparition, and I explained to everybody what I had seen and where I saw it. And that's when things got a little bit eerie. I don't recall who noticed it first, but in one of the refrigerators directly in front of where I saw the apparition was a name tag or label, and the tag said William Wood. There's no doubt in my mind as to what I saw that day, and reflecting back upon it, I believe my conscious level of thinking was down while my subconscious level was up, having been so involved in working on the cases all morning. I think that somehow this allowed my subconscious or inner spirit, or whatever you want to call it, to perhaps see something that I would not normally see. A sort of heightened level of relaxation, of openness, so to speak. And as you can probably see, all of this has really stuck with me. So I started this job about a month ago. I'm an overnight security officer in one of multiple buildings on a large campus. I signed an NDA, so I really cannot be more specific to potentially identify my client. But I started my job training on first shift, and I'll admit that I was skeptical when I started hearing the stories. Things moving, doors opening and closing, actual full-bodied apparitions in the middle of the day, a little girl that throws things in one of the older buildings, stuff of that nature. I'm usually pretty sensitive to the paranormal, having experienced it often growing up. I've experienced many unexplainable things, but the buildings I trained in just didn't feel threatening, so I just dismissed it. I've been working my regular shift for 2 weeks now, and on my first day on third shift, I was checking a bathroom when a shadow man leaned out and glared at me as the door shut. Instantly, I felt paralyzed, and I no longer felt safe. But I tried to brush it off and told myself that it should be okay. I mean, I need this job. It's the only place in my area that pays a livable wage. I put up with every whisper, every bang, every uneasy feeling of danger as I walked through the building, and I told myself that it's just an adjustment period. We're new to each other and it should calm down with time. Yesterday, I learned that my building specifically was built on top of a historical graveyard, specifically a graveyard for slaves and their descendants. When the property was bought by my client, the bodies were exhumed and moved across the street, but their original resting place, that is right under my feet every night when I go to work. Tonight I was checking the emergency exits, which are enclosed in a stairwell. I checked the door was secure and there were no hazards. Then I tried to re-enter the building from the stairwell and the door was held tight. I would open it just enough to see that no one was there on the other side and it would slam shut again. A few minutes after that, I finally got out of the stairwell and I entered a loading area and was immediately confronted by a massive shadow figure looking hat man, at least 7 feet tall, and was watching me. I took a deep breath and I just kept moving. Funnily enough, tonight was probably the least threatened that I've felt since starting working nights here. But anyway, I have a friend on day shift in my building, and before I went into work last night, she told me that the activity yesterday was wild. She warned me that she had been touched on the staircase and that there had been a lot of voices. She told me to be careful around the elevator and emergency exits because she was getting bad vibes, as she called it. Honestly, I should have listened too. My first patrol was eerily quiet. At this point, I'm used to some kind of noise, a humming or a tapping at least. talking and doors opening and closing at most. But my first hour at work was completely silent. My second patrol is when the shadows started moving, stretching and following me. The first floor, which I previously thought was safe, was starting to feel ominous all of a sudden, and everything stayed somewhat calm until midnight. That was when I started getting touched. Being touched, that had never happened before, and I liked it even less that it was on my shoulders and head that were being targeted. I wear my hair in a long braid to keep it out of the way, and last night, it was tugged on multiple times. And unlike my friend, they didn't keep the touches in the stairwell. They followed me in and out of the rooms, and I could hear angry muttering the entire time. I tried talking to them. I asked them to back off a little bit. I just wanted to do my job, and it's Friday anyway. I'll be gone for 2 days after this. I tried to kindly explain why I had to check everything, but the activity just got worse. What ended up being my last patrol at 4 a.m. though was definitely the scariest. I should have known better as well. I should have paid closer attention. On the previously safe first floor, I could hear footsteps following me. Then I checked the second bathroom. I did my ritual, knock twice, hold the door for 5 to 10 seconds, announce myself, and then enter. But when I entered, a massive shadow was stood in the back corner, and I could tell that it did not want me there. I could feel its glare and the raw aggression rolling through the air from it. This was so much worse than anything I'd experienced yet. I was shaky and I stood still in place for a moment. So I apologized but explained that I needed to check the bathroom. It disappeared suddenly and I excused myself to continue my patrol. On the third floor, the door to the staircase was held shut again. They wouldn't let me back in the building for almost 5 minutes. It was a battle to even get in there. I tried walking down, but the lower level doors were also held firm. I wanted to respect their wishes, but I also needed to finish my patrol. Finally, I'm able to go to the second floor, and immediately, I felt terrified as the elevator door opened. The floor felt somehow impossibly dark. I walked out, and what was silence exploded into noise. I could hear banging on the walls, and I took a deep breath. I needed to finish this patrol. So, like the idiot I am, I kept going, and my braid was pulled as I moved to go into the central fire riser, the system that feeds the water to overhead sprinklers. But I still had longer to go. I round the corner from the storage quad to go down the main hallway, and the light that doesn't come on until I'm on the other side of the hallway turns on suddenly. And that was when dread filled my gut. I keep going. I make it to the other end undisturbed. As I approach the first bathroom on that side, I hear a creaking sound though. Initially I dismiss it. There's a roof access nearby I have to check, and it probably came from there after all. I do my checks and I notice that shadows are congregating around the elevator now. I walk up the small, solid concrete stairs to check the roof access, and everything seems okay. I step back inside and the concrete seems to shake under me slightly, which was definitely unnerving, but this is literally the last part of my patrol, so I was like, it's fine, I'll just get it over and done with. I'll go back to the office, radio in a complete patrol, and it should be fine. And I got into the elevator. The elevator moved maybe a foot before it happened. A loud bang, and I screamed as it fell. The door didn't open. I was dazed and afraid, and for some reason I didn't radio in for backup right that second. I was panicked, I guess, and dumb, I know that, and so I pressed another button. But the door opened, and I was somehow safely on the ground floor. Well, I got out as quickly as I could, and I went to my office to call it in. I would later learn after I got home that my dog had started freaking out at about the same time as I started my patrol on the second floor. She had scared my family in her desperation to get out, and honestly, I'm just really scared now. I know that I'm not safe there. I don't want to just walk away, but I'm actively searching for any kind of protection that I can get, and I will definitely be using the staircases from now on. So I was maybe 9 to 10 years old, and we had just moved to a more islandish neighborhood in West Virginia, right over a massive bridge. We were moving in with some close family friends and their family. The house was relatively big with at least 4 bedrooms, including the office, a basement, 2 bathrooms, and an attic and walk-in closet. In order to get to our room, we had to walk through the upstairs bathroom, then through the walk-in closet, and on the other side of our room was another door that connected to another bedroom. When we first moved in, we were told that the previous owners, or tenants, that they practiced voodoo, although I'm not sure what exactly it was, to be honest. But whatever it was, there were tons of dolls in the house, ranging from baby dolls to just the heads and hanging Barbies, all that. Outside of the room that me and my mother occupied were 4 pencils with yarn heads on them. They were sort of strapped outside the door, and written on each pencil was a name. I don't remember the names, but we all advised our family friends not to remove them. It felt wrong to us, I suppose, but he did anyways, and our bedroom door didn't stay shut for whatever reason. At the time, I was still super small, so I still sat on a full car seat, and we used the car seat to sort of keep the door cracked instead of wide open. And one particular night, all the adults except for 2 and their 3 to 4-year-old child, they went out to a local bar. I stayed back with my iPad watching it in our room. I accidentally turned off my iPad, and at that time I didn't know the password to get back in. So I tried to turn the TV on, but that didn't work, so I was just sort of left there in silence with my toys. I remember feeling how quiet it was. Like, you know that it shouldn't be as quiet as it was. Maybe 10 minutes or so goes by, and for no good reason I can think of, my door just suddenly flies wide open, even with the car seat still in front of it. I remember breaking down in tears over it, and honestly, when I think about it, it still shakes me a bit. I was told the toddler probably used that bathroom and pushed the door open, but with how fast it was, I would have seen them running away or something. I have had other encounters in that house after that, ranging from my toys not being where I left them and not being able to shower with the frosted glass doors, as I could vividly see a figure outside of them that wasn't there. But we moved shortly after, only a couple of months, as things between the family got abusive and weird, and so thankfully I didn't have to put up with it for too long. So back in 2017, my wife, or girlfriend at the time, and I were living in this house as young adults, 19-ish years old. I was smoking a bit, not even good weed too, but just some mid stuff, and we were watching something on TV. My wife wasn't smoking. The TV is hanging on the wall, and to the left of the TV is the hallway. The left side of the hallway is the bathroom, the right side is the spare bedroom, and the straight back was our bedroom. While watching TV, I noticed a black shadowy figure glide through the bathroom door, glides across the hall and goes into the spare bedroom. Obviously, it didn't open any door, just sort of went through them. The figure was roughly about 5 feet tall, I would say, and very broad-shouldered. So I see the figure appear and disappear. I instantly thought that my weed was laced or something. I started looking at my blunt, even though I felt fine, and I really didn't say anything about it. I thought that I was just seeing things, so I started laughing a bit. While this happens though, our dogs were laying at my feet until the figure appeared, and they were suddenly terrified and got on the couch with us. My wife asks, "Why are you laughing?" and I replied with, I thought that I saw something." And she immediately replied with, "Did it come out of the bathroom?" That's when we talk about what we had seen, and we both were seeing the same thing apparently. Same description of it and everything. After it disappears, I get back up to check the spare bedroom and whatnot, make sure all the doors are locked and all that, no windows open. I check the ceiling fan because it was on, just to see if the shadow of the fan blades could have possibly been whatever that we saw, but there's just no way possible that it could have been that fan. With the dogs getting scared and just being able to sense a great presence of energy that night, I fully believe that it was a ghost or a spirit or a demon or something similar. 7.5 years later, and I have never experienced anything remotely close to this again. The backstory to the house too is that it was my wife's aunt's house and she had let us take over to rent it while she moved out with her boyfriend. I don't know much about the house otherwise, but the aunt never experienced anything like this and thinks that we were just tweaking out on weed. Note too that we stayed in this house for a few more weeks before we finally moved out. This happened to me roughly 1.5 years ago, and I still get anxious thinking back about what happened in the summer of 2023. It was the year that I had my first success with my online business, which allowed me to start traveling Europe while working and saving up for my dream of buying some farmland. 2023 started amazingly. I lived a few months in Malta, then in Budapest, visiting friends who studied abroad. I'm originally from Germany. I'm 32, turning 33 this year, and the first few destinations were a wonderful contrast to the miserable cold winters that drag on for months in Germany. After having a tremendous time in Malta and Budapest, it was already the beginning of summer. My final destination that summer was to visit a friend. His name was Ben. He's about a year younger than me, and currently studying medicine in Varna, located in the very east of Bulgaria. It's an interesting place with lots of Soviet-style, slightly run-down architecture, but it still has its charm as a beach city. The people there are very nice, and there are some beautiful spots. There are many expats, and I spent my days enjoying the large parks near the beach itself, and the various cafes and clubs. I met lots of people, and frequently went out to beach clubs with them on weekends. It was a nice hot summer, and I was enjoying myself, until one particular night. You see, I was out with Ben and many of his university friends again. We had partied all night, had drinks, danced for hours, and just enjoyed ourselves during this wonderful summer night. Since we'd been to day events before the party, I started feeling tired and I decided to head home eventually. I should describe the layout of the city quickly as well, as it's quite unique. Varna has a beach along its entire length, and for most parts there are very big parks stretching for kilometers along the beach before they lead to the city. My rented apartment, it was slightly northwest of the clubs, roughly a 10 to 15 minute walk, which I'd done many times by this stage. People had warned me about occasional attacks or muggings or robberies or whatever, always asking me to walk at least part of the way with someone. I usually didn't listen, just walked with my music playing, though I remained wary of my surroundings at all times. That night, a few people who were also tired left with me. They lived a bit more west of me, so I had to leave them after about 5 minutes or so, and continued alone with my music as I always did. It must have been around 4 in the morning when I came to a park that I usually cross, separate from the main beach parks, closer to where I was actually living. It being summer and a weekend, there were still a few people walking around and driving, even at like 4 a.m. When I entered the park, I wasn't shocked to see someone sitting on a bench, maybe 50 meters ahead of me to the right. He was sitting there, staring at his phone, and I remember the scene vividly. Behind him were some bushes and trees, but as the lighting in the park was very sparse, I only noticed at the last moment that somebody else was approaching him from behind through said bushes. I think because I walked into the park, the guy sitting on the bench must have briefly looked up from his phone and heard somebody approaching. Honestly too, it all happened so fast. I saw someone running out of the bushes with both hands raised over their head, holding a large rock, sprinting at the guy, still sitting there as he turned his head. Not immediately realizing the danger, I kept walking briefly before stopping. The guy on the bench screamed and ran straight out of the park, vaulting over another row of bushes and disappearing across the street. I pulled off my headphones and just stood there watching, not fully comprehending what was actually happening. You need to understand that this all happened really quickly. Until the guy who had just tried to attack the other person with a rock suddenly turned to face me. A shiver ran down my spine as adrenaline rushed through me, preparing to run. When he lifted that rock again and started manically smiling while running in my direction, I instantly turned and I ran for my life. He followed me for roughly 2 minutes. I could still see him behind even after crossing the street. I ran around the block and was incredibly relieved to find a kebab shop still open. I rushed through the door. The people inside were shocked and I couldn't speak straight, but I didn't need to say much as the psychopath came to the store and started bashing the window with the rock. And suddenly, when the glass broke, he finally ran away. Now, what makes this even more chilling is that I later discovered that I probably encountered someone who wasn't new to violence. In the same city, same park, someone had been bludgeoned and killed with multiple stabs in the back just 1 year earlier. I waited a few minutes, I put my music back in, and I quickly walked home, carefully avoiding the park. Afterwards, I was shaking at home, locking every door. I couldn't sleep well, and the next morning I discovered that I had fractured a tooth from grinding it in my sleep that night. I'm forever grateful that this whole thing turned out okay, obviously. I'm also grateful that I met those people who offered to smoke earlier, as the timing may have actually saved both me and the guy on the bench. I mean, if I hadn't invented that park at that exact moment, the man on the bench, he really might not have noticed his attacker in time. While this was the scariest situation of my life, other than nearly drowning in the ocean once, I think that I learned that there are some situations that you really just cannot control. Stay safe out there, everyone, and maybe don't walk through the park alone at 4 a.m. in a foreign city. But hey, maybe that's just common sense. So my roommates and I are young girls living alone in our college townhouse neighborhood. The house was built no later than maybe 3 to 4 years ago, and honestly that's really pushing it. But lots of weird stuff has been happening, and last night it all sort of came to a head. So we're all Christians, and I grew up Catholic, so we all very much believe in spirits and demons and all that, and the power of Christ to defeat them. I had a dream maybe a couple of months ago of my dog growling at an evil presence, and I rebuked it in the dream in the name of Jesus and woke up suddenly because my white noise was off and it was 3:33 a.m. I wasn't totally terrified by that or anything, but then my coworker came over and said that she swore that she heard me banging around in the house and the back of the house when I wasn't home. And it keeps happening. I always hear my roommate banging around in her room when she's not even home. We will hear knocking on the walls, and I've heard my dog rustling around in his kennel when he's right next to me, etc., etc. And so I thought that maybe there's an animal somewhere. Until last night. You see, last night I was sitting on the couch doing some homework and watching some TV. I let out a low whistle and I immediately hear it repeated back to me. Again, I am all alone, and so I rewinded the TV to see if it was just a really well-timed coincidence, and it was zero whistling. So I called my sister, who lives 3 houses down, to come over, and she runs over and doesn't see anyone outside around the house or anything. Naturally, I go through the house with my industrial wasp spray can and check to make sure that there's nobody actually in the house. I came back to where my sister is and she says to me, "Don't whistle right now, I'm freaked out." But I can assure you that I didn't whistle at all. But she swore that she heard me whistle again. My roommate finally comes home, but I tell her what happened and eventually I leave, offering her to come with, but She says that she's fine and just wants to go to bed. Then she texts me in around maybe an hour or so and says, "Are you back home?" And I say no, and she tells me that she heard me talking this whole time, and I just said yoo-hoo, trying to get her attention. So she heard me talking too. Obviously, something is in this house, and my question is, as a Christian, is what the heck do we do about this? How do we get rid of it? And can we even get rid of it? I've experienced many paranormal encounters while on duty as a police officer, but there was one call that I went to, a death notification, that really freaked me out. I had to contact some family members of a deceased woman that was involved in a fatal car accident a few miles away from her home. When I arrived, I met a woman near the roadway just inside of the property gate. She said that she had heard me coming from miles away, and I asked her if she lived at the residence, which she confirmed that she did. After asking her to speak with me at the house, she agreed, but she said that she needed to walk as the house was about 75 yards from the road. After making it to the house, I approached the front door on a small wooden porch and began scanning the driveway for the woman. It was about 1 a.m. at this stage. While looking for the woman, the front door opened and a younger woman appeared. She was obviously concerned about my presence and asked if everything was okay, and so I asked if I could speak with her and any adults inside, and they welcomed me in. I told her that I would wait for the woman I met near the gate, and she told me that nobody else should be home. I then freaked out a bit and began searching the property, but there was nothing. After entering the residence, I told her and her husband the news about Susan, which ended up being her mother, and she said that her mother moved in a few months back after her father had passed and wasn't handling it well. While she and her husband were comforting one another, I began looking at photos on the wall. There was this picture of a middle-aged woman that stuck out to me. She was a younger version of the woman that I spoke with near the gate. And while looking at the picture, the daughter confirmed that that was actually her mother, the woman that had passed in that wreck. Honestly, I really have no way to explain this. I mean, did I really speak with the ghost of the individual that died in the crash just before telling her family about what happened? To give a tad bit of background, my family is heavily Catholic, and I find myself a bit skeptical in anything spiritual or religious, I guess. But really, I just don't know how else to explain what has happened to me. When I was maybe 14 to 16, maybe as a way to distance myself from the church, I found an intense interest in the occult, paganism, things of that sort. I would even practice witchcraft from time to time, in an attempt to get some kind of definitive proof that something is out there. Nothing really worked, but it did feel like something was happening when I practiced. A practice I got especially into and would do frequently is meditation, which isn't inherently spiritual, I know that, but it does help in certain cases. Anyways, this story starts while I was meditating in my room. I am maybe, halfway through my 15 minutes that I'd planned to meditate when something just felt wrong all of a sudden. I cannot properly explain the emotion that I had. My best attempt would be the feeling of going down off the peak of a roller coaster, mixed with a sorrow of sorts. Anyway, so I feel that in my gut, and I open my eyes to scan the room. Everything looked in place, but that feeling just wouldn't go away. I turned to pause my timer, then I noticed a painting on my wall, which I had for quite a while at this stage. It was the Starry Night painting, and as I scanned over to it, something about it was just wrong. It looked as if all the stars were actually glowing. The longer that I looked, the more bright a certain star got as well. It was one of the stars in the top left corner, just to the right of the trees. This star slowly but surely got brighter and brighter, and I was so sure that I was dreaming or hallucinating or something that I had gotten up off of the bed and started to make my way toward the painting. But as I got up and started to move closer, the star would fade. Not as if someone was dimming the lights though. It was as if a fog was setting over this star. As I got even closer, the fog practically snuffed out the star, and in its place it was dark. I sat for a minute trying to just process what had just happened in my brain, still looking at this dark spot on my painting. As I stared though, something started to appear out of the dark noise. At first, I thought it was the star coming back into my vision, but as it became more clear, I saw it for what it really was. A face. A whole figure, actually. Big enough to cover a large portion of the painting. I remember my fight or flight kicking in when realizing what I was actually looking at. I distinctly remember thinking that the feeling of that experience went from curious to bad. Still, I stayed in place and waited to see what else would happen, like I was in some kind of trance. Once the figure was fully visible, I felt like it saw me. We were looking at each other, eye to eye, soul to whatever it was, and we sat there for 20 seconds or so, with nothing happening. And I was about to be done with this and run out of the room, but then it did something. It started to reach out its hand, not in a threatening way, almost as if it was offering something. I don't really know what it was selling, but I certainly wasn't buying. Its hand almost looked as if it was fully outside of this painting as well. This was the last straw. I'd gotten my taste of paranormal for the night, and I ran to my light switch and flicked on my bright overhead light. I had a dim lamp on for meditation, and looked at the painting. And suddenly, it was totally normal. Nothing different about it. I sat and stared to see if something would happen, and nothing ever did. As I was coming back from my trance, I realized my face was wet with tears, something that I hadn't noticed before the light was on. I then go to my phone to text whoever, telling someone about this, but I stopped before even unlocking it. Almost 30 minutes had passed since I had paused that timer, and that felt like an impossibly long time. There was absolutely no way that I spent 30 minutes staring at a painting just then. It felt like maybe 3 to 4 minutes of watching, tops. After realizing my little time loss, I freaked out and ran into my mother's room. Needing somebody else's presence, I just couldn't stand being alone anymore. She heard my whole story and was 100% convinced that I had just had a run-in with a demonic presence. Putting meaning behind all of the visions, like how the stars were holy ghosts with demons putting a fog over them and all that sort of thing. I didn't know if I was fully on board with that idea, but I was just glad to be with someone other than myself. She then got my dad to go in and bless the room, leaving a Saint Benedict medal in my room to hopefully ward off anything negative. He then took the painting off the wall and took it outside, and that was the last time that I ever saw it. To be honest though, good riddance. I'm actually sharing this now in the same room that this all happened in as well. I won't lie too, I kind of feel off at times in here, I guess. Like I'm being watched, but having the medal and several crucifixes does help ease my feeling. I'm 19 now and about to be headed out for college, and I thought that I would put down this experience in writing before it fades anymore with time. I'm not exactly Catholic now, but I have given up the practice of my past. I'm fully open to any and all explanations that anyone may have as to what happened to me years ago, paranormal or not. And so, if you have anything to share, then thank you. Also, I'd like to just tack on here that I was absolutely sober during this entire experience and the entire day before that, and hallucinations are definitely not something that I've ever struggled with. I, a 33-year-old male, am a skeptic when it comes to anything paranormal. I generally don't believe anything related to the paranormal and would find explanations for what may be deemed paranormal. Well, except for one which happened to me and my siblings back in 2000. My family, my parents and 2 younger siblings, lived with our grandmother in a 2-story house. Our family lives on the ground floor, whereas my grandmother, she has the 2nd floor to herself. My parents have a separate room while my siblings and I share the same room in separate beds. Our bedroom and our parents' bedroom was connected by a sort of shared bathroom. My grandmother usually comes to our room and uses our bathroom to pee as well, and I guess it was to check up on us as well while our parents weren't home yet. Anyway, one night, our parents took an unusually long time to come home. So to pass the time, my siblings and I just watched Beauty and the Beast in one of those VHS tapes since it was our favorite Disney movie back then. We were watching the movie for some time when suddenly the door to our room just sort of spontaneously opened, and a few seconds later, the door to our toilet opened and closed, and we heard the flushing sound of the toilet. This was followed by the opening of the toilet door and the opening of our bedroom door. I remember my siblings and I being in a sort of state of shock, and we huddled together on the corner of the bed just sort of crying. I also distinctly remember that the television turned to static, and my siblings and I were freaked out the entire time. At the time, my siblings and I were around 9, 8, and 5 years old, so we were fully aware of what was happening. Eventually, our parents arrived and saw us crying, but they really didn't think anything of it. Well, the next day my mother took me to the bathroom and she told me that my grandmother had actually passed away. I was certain that I did not tell them about the events that happened the previous night, and more than 2 decades have passed and my siblings and I never really discussed it. I conveniently thought of that event as a false memory since I never really got any confirmation from external sources that whatever happened was actually real, nor was I able to talk about it with my siblings. I just lived my life thinking that I never truly had a paranormal experience. Anyway, I'm currently doing a PhD in the United Kingdom, and I visited my family back home in the Philippines during the holidays. The entire family was in the car, and we were talking about grandmother's last birthday celebration. We were part Chinese, and she may have been like 70 years old for that birthday, so it was a special celebration and thus memorable. We were just sort of reminiscing about the event, but then my mother suddenly mentioned, "Do you remember about the day that she died and you were crying even though you didn't know that your grandmother was dead?" She then went into some detail about the events that my siblings and I experienced that night. Apparently, my younger sister had told my mother about that night when it was her turn to be told about my grandmother's passing, and that confirmed everything for me, and really freaked me the heck out. So, this happened to me, a 27-year-old female, about 6 years ago. At the time, I was working in a bar, so I got off work pretty late, usually around 3 a.m. Since I lived quite close to the bar, I would always walk home after my shift, and there were 2 different routes that I would take. One was along the street, where most of the city's bars and the clubs were, and it was usually really crowded. Since I was pretty exhausted and I didn't want to see any more people that night, I took the other route, which was much quieter but also much darker, and I never felt very safe there at night. Anyway, as I was walking, a group of drunk guys approached me, blocking my way. I made it clear that I had no interest in talking to them, so they eventually let me pass. A nearby taxi driver must have seen what was going on because he rolled down his window and asked if I needed a ride home. I declined, saying that I didn't have to go too far, but he insisted, saying that he wouldn't even charge me. I thought that maybe he was looking out for me since he had seen the incident with the drunk guys, so I made the really stupid decision to accept this offer. After I got in, he asked for my address and we started driving. I even offered to pay him, but he refused. Shortly after, we arrived near my home, but instead of stopping, he just sort of drove past it. I asked where he was going, and he acted like it was an accident, saying that he was just looking for a place to turn around. But he kept driving for a few more minutes until we ended up in an industrial area where he pulled into a dead end. At this point, I was terrified, but honestly I didn't know what to do, especially since my phone had died earlier. I just sort of sat there and eventually said, "Well, this is a perfect opportunity for you to turn around." He looked at me, and I think he got scared to follow through with whatever he had planned. After a moment, he simply said that I was right, turned the car around, and drove me back to my place. My heart was pounding as I got out of that car, but I was really grateful that nothing terrible had happened that night. I know that it was incredibly stupid to get into that car in the first place, and I still don't fully understand why I made that decision. Honestly though, I think that I just got really lucky in the end. So, before I begin this, I would just like to say that this is a true story, and I am also of sound mind. So when I was 7, my family moved into a haunted house. There was an abandoned house that my friends and I would pass on our walk to school. It was in need of a lot of work, the grass was overgrown like a hayfield, and the driveway all tore up. It looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. And well, my friend and I decided one summer day to check it out. We thought that it would be a good idea to smash some of the windows out. We broke a sliding glass door and poked our heads in, and it immediately gave us chills. It was super eerie and oddly cold for a summer day in there. We dipped out and we never went back after that. Well, fast forward a few months and my parents tell me that we're moving. I jump in the truck to go with them to look at the house, and when we arrived, my heart instantly sank because it was that same house. I was really nervous. I thought that they knew my friend and I had broken the windows and I was about to get in trouble or something, but they didn't say a word about it. And it was just by some sort of fluke chance that it was the same house that apparently we were buying. We ended up moving in and my stepdad fixed the place up a bit. It was still eerily cold inside, and I remember the layout being very strange. The kitchen, for instance, that was in the basement, and there was a long L-shaped hallway that went behind the kitchen and really led to nowhere. The weird events, though, they started happening shortly afterward. The first one was when I was laying in bed one morning. I was awake but with the covers over my head, and I felt something that I can only describe as a fist being dropped onto my face. I ripped the covers down off of my head immediately to see who it was, but nobody was there. I kind of shrugged it off as a really weird occurrence, but later I'd find out that something was in that house and it was really ticked off at me. I can only assume that it was mad at me for breaking the windows or whatever, but I was walking down the stairs to the basement one day when I felt a shove in the middle of my back. It pushed me off the last 2 steps, like plain as day, as if somebody was behind me. I obviously glared behind me, but there was nothing there. Again, I shrugged this off as another weird occurrence, until it happened again. Exact same staircase, exact same steps. Something pushed me for a second time off of the last 2 steps. I really didn't want to tell anyone because I figured that they would think that I was going crazy or something. And truth be told, I thought that I might have been a little bit crazy. But fast forward a few months and my stepdad tells us that he had something freaky happen to him. He said that he was doing the tile in the bathroom and said that he saw a face in the tiles looking back at him. But it wasn't his reflection, it was a completely different face. Well, We ended up moving out of there, and decades went by before I even thought about it again. I told my wife the story and wanted to bring her to the house. We drove to it, and lo and behold, it was exactly as it was almost 30 years ago. Abandoned, the grass overgrown, and no renovations done on it at all. I drove by it the other day, and now it looks like somebody might be living there. I would genuinely love to talk to them to see if they experienced anything, but I also really don't want to freak them out, which really is what brings me here. What do you guys think that I should do? Should I just go and talk to them, or should I approach this a little differently? So I want to share a story of my childhood home in upstate New York, and I thought that you guys might like it. I personally don't know if I believe in the paranormal because, other than this house, I haven't experienced anything else. So, when my dad and my mum first bought this house, my dad was working at a nearby music store. I think it was anyway. While working here, he said that a very suspicious old man would come in, often wearing bones on his necklace. My dad, being punk and 20-something, thought that this necklace was awesome and asked the old man about it. The old man told him that they were real bones. My dad, messing with the old man because he didn't believe him, told him that he wanted a human skull. The man said that he could get him one. My dad thought that this was hilarious, and after a couple of weeks went by, he started to forget about it. But one day, that man came in and actually gave my dad a skull. My dad was very surprised, obviously, but assumed it wasn't real, and so he took it home. My mum, who is very superstitious, was really mad at my dad and told him to get rid of it. My dad decided to put it into the basement and forgot about it, and after this, the house was just never the same. My aunt told me that she saw my brother, who was probably a toddler around this time, being held by a little girl out of the corner of her eye. My mum also claims to have seen this little girl hanging around me and my brother's rooms when we were toddlers. My mother soon began to have horrific dreams and would see people standing by her bed. She woke up on multiple occasions screaming bloody murder and claiming that there were men in her closet. Weirdly too, sometimes she wouldn't even remember these fits. Now, when I was around 5, I started to have extreme night terrors as well. I would also sleepwalk, and one night my mum woke up in another scared frenzy that she would have. She quickly went to my room to see that I wasn't there. She went downstairs to see me sitting crisscross applesauce in front of the TV that wasn't even on. When she asked what I was doing, I told her that I was watching my show and that I wanted to hang out with my friends outside. I don't remember this, by the way, but my mum carried me upstairs and put me into bed. Eventually, too, my brother played with a Ouija board and claimed to see my mum standing up straight in bed with her eyes staring forward. When he tried to talk to her, she simply got back into bed and just went back to sleep. Another time, another thing that would happen is that you could hear people walking up and down the stairs, even when you were home alone. There was often knocking on my walls as well, and after my parents got divorced, my